Welcome to this space between spaces, a little sliver of calm before the storm that awaits you. Before we begin, there are a few things we must talk about. Not just a disclaimer that'll be brought up in a bit, but a little tarot reading of mine. You see, no matter where you are right now, I could see 3 cards before you. 3 that many of us have. The was, the moment of time before you clicked into this video. The is, the moment of time that you spent exploring this video. And the will be, the moment of time after you've explored this video. And today, we'll be exploring these for our target today, Lily Orchard, and this particular video. The was reveals a woman who was there at the beginning of a show so interesting that it grabbed her attention, as it did to many others. But at one point, something felt off. A message that, due to previous experiences, she did not like, and fed into her confirmation bias repeatedly throughout the show's run, which happened to fall in with a crowd known as Steven Universe Critical. This all culminated in her most popular video to date, Steven Universe is Garbage and Here's Why. The is comes after 5 years of talking on and on about what the show did, how it failed, and using said show for her criticisms of anything really. Story-based cartoons, redemption arcs, anime, Pokemon, ContraPoints, Black Lives Matter, yet she is left surprised at how everyone only brings up the was, and nobody is focused on the is. She feels as if she can't get past it, and makes a final video talking about it all. The will be has her past come to haunt her in various ways. As multiple people call her out on various takes, not just ones referring to Steven Universe, as well as people stepping forward against her, she becomes annoyed. She becomes fed up with the world, and yet is never able to escape her own head, her own interests, her own biases, her own complexes. She becomes one with her echo chamber, and this time, it might be permanent, but we'll have to wait and see. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some therapy to do.
Let's begin. I'm gonna make you wish that I'd stayed gone. Tune on in when I'm done. Your status quo will know its race is run. Oh, this will be fun.
So, Cartoonshi, one of the most notable critics of Steven Universe while Future was airing, released a video in which he looked back at Steven Universe and everything that it did. During that retrospective, he talks about the characters themselves and what he likes about them, how they've developed through the series, and sometimes even lets himself be vulnerable about his positions in regards to how he feels about the show, and even how it helped him. His final conclusion ended up being one that acknowledged the flaws that he saw in the show, yet still seeing the brilliance of the best that Steven Universe had to offer through all of that. It's an incredibly poignant retrospective that, while the show itself goes through a redemption arc of its own in the public eye, helps to show that he's matured in his critical thinking and overall mindfulness. A few days later, Lily Orchard, one of, if not the most notable critic of Steven Universe, released a video that also tried to look back at Steven Universe and everything that it did to ask herself, was I wrong about Steven Universe? And in her eyes, short answer no, long answer, well, this video. While this background is seemingly sufficient enough, considering I've done videos on Lily Orchard and Steven Universe before, there's one thing I want to mention really quickly. Are you doing another video on Lily Orchard? Wait, what? Who are you? I'm your therapist, who else? A home intruder? One that also knows quite a bit about the topic you're discussing, considering how many sessions we've had. Now listen, you gotta stop on Lily Orchard. I'm pretty sure your audience knows about the harm that she's done, especially to Steven Universe's reputation online, and at this rate, you're making her into a bandwagon. Well, I'd be happy to tell you that. I mean, you definitely could have just done that business video with one of them, not all 3. Well, to be fair, they all built on each other in terms of context, and that's besides the point. And to be fair, there's so many other... This is my last video on Lily Orchard. What? Yeah, there's several reasons, but the big one is that I think there's not really any need to talk about her anymore. Sure, she talks about why a lot of people dislike Steven Universe and brings up the reason that everyone does, but that's the thing, everybody does. Spending a lot of my time talking about Lily sidesteps talking about actual issues, because it ends up being, oh, it's Lily Orchard, of course she's wrong. Oh, I see. What other reasons do you have? Another thing is how desperately she clings on to Steven Universe and fandoms in general. Like, if you scroll past a bunch of her videos, you always see at least one Steven Universe thumbnail or Steven Universe related video, along with other shows with large fandoms like Owl House, She-Ra, or Hazbin Hotel. Personally, I don't want to contribute to that sort of stuff anymore. Oh yeah, absolutely. Then there's the fact that this is it. This is gonna be her last video discussing the show. I don't mean that she won't talk about the show again, because we all know that she will, but this is her last big spark of Steven Universe relevance, and one that covers the entire show, from this to the movie and even future. So this is her final big step forward. This is the video that she replaced her old video on the channel page with, her most popular video, mind you, and one of the most popular Steven Universe criticism videos. That's all understandable, but I feel like if Lily or her fans are here, they'd be gone by this point. In case any of them stay, there's a fourth reason that we'll get to at the end of this video. Ah, yeah, see that there? I gotta hear what's going on with that. Oh, okay, no problem, but in that case, I feel like you might get too irrationally mad at other parts in this video. 'Tis the curse of covering Lily Orchard. But how about I help you out with that at least? What do you mean? I'll try and make sure that you keep your cool through all this. I've studied up on Lily Orchard, so we can save it for the end and keep this video focused. Well, I guess you are a therapist after all, so I guess you can help out. Yeah. Oh, there's just one more thing. Do you mind if I bring some friends along to help us out? I don't know what kind of therapy you intend to do, but I prefer one-on-one sessions. Oh, don't worry. They're only gonna be here to read some text and other stuff for when we need it. Sure, sounds fair. Better than grabbing people from Danganronpa. From what now? In any case, let's get into this video.
I have in many instances tried to update it to more modern standards with better critique, which none of you terminally outraged motherfuckers bothered to watch. So when I see people still passing it around trying to refute it, I feel like I'm locked in a time loop where a video I made while I was dealing with severe abuse and was therefore constantly angry is being held up as if it reflects everything about me today.
We're only 30 seconds in and... Oh, I'll just jot onto this for later. Oh, okay. Fine. But ignoring that there are some people there that don't see much change in your reviewing styles overall, but assuming that those critics don't see the way you improve and are just making you into a straw man, then the complaint has another problem. While this is an appropriate complaint in a vacuum, you seem to not realize how influential your video was overall. People don't necessarily see your video as the ultimate representation of Lily Orchard, but as the ultimate representation of bad faith criticism against Steven Universe. One of the most popular videos on the subject, with over 8 million views, and one that has so many people parrot those views to so many people, like Lapis being an abuser, Bismuth being about how violence is bad against mass murders, and we should forgive everyone, as well as that being a main theme of the show. With all that context given, of course there's reasons why people cover it still.
Let me make this clear, I would love nothing more than to sit down with someone who really likes this show and thinks it's brilliant and pick their brain, because I am fascinated by that notion. The problem is, nobody does it. Most of the rebuttals to that old video are less about arguing why Steven Universe is good, and more about being outraged at the sheer audacity of suggesting otherwise.
Keep that last line in mind, but okay. What about Leah C's entire channel backlog, or the Roundtable's channel backlog? There's James Woodall's video about the most interesting scene in Steven Universe, or Cel's Victor views of the movies and her deep dive into future. There's Ella's Marked video talking about the first season, as well as Hiding in Private's The Point of Steven Universe. There's a lot of content about how Steven Universe is brilliant, and it's kinda your fault for not looking into them. But, again, you should also stay conscious of the impact of your video, to the point where nobody really wanted to talk about Steven Universe in such a way, because it was a controversial series. It's not like Lily rallied up an army to fight against Steven Universe and make it have bad review scores, but this lack of consciousness of her original video is rather perplexing.
There have been a half a dozen videos trying to debunk the old video, and honestly, I haven't watched a single one of them.
It's later already. Literally a few seconds earlier, you said that most videos that talk about the show are ones that are upset at the fact that you say that the show was garbage. And then you say that you haven't seen any of them. So how would you know what they were about?
I would definitely watch a Steven Universe's Genius, and here's why. Because I find that position fascinating. But let's go through this 5-year-old video and debunk it is exactly the kind of combative mudslinging that's just fucking boring. It's not 2018 anymore. I don't want to fight you in the Denny's parking lot over Utena fanfiction.
You! Shut up! You!
Keep talking.
When I got to this line, I thought that when she said, I don't want to fight you over this anymore, that she was referring to cleaning her hands of Steven Universe, so to speak. Would it have been hypocritical given every video she's released having some form of Steven Universe in it, either in the thumbnail or the script? Yeah, but I thought it would have been a good idea to move on. But no, this comment is meant to talk about the original 2-hour video itself. We'll get more to that at the very end though. For now, I want to point out that this joke doesn't make sense because this version of the video covers ER and Easy Peasy's videos on the topic, and does so to point out the good in the show, inversely to what you believe. While there's a brief mention of Lily, that's all it is. Brief.
Part of critical analysis is having to compare where something missteps to when it doesn't. That's where criticism becomes fun. Nothing is truly 100% bad, except conservative politics, and that contrast between its successes and failures is where criticism really shines.
Wait, I'm confused. You said you want to watch a video where it says that Steven Universe is genius, then you say this, which implies that a video where Steven Universe is genius wouldn't be critical analysis, or at least it would be missing that part of it. So you actively want to watch a video that talks about the show that isn't the best at critical analysis, and you would want to critically analyze it by picking their brains about it. Well, that just sounds like you're looking for easy targets.
There's a reason everybody says it could have been great, because after multiple episodes where characters do nothing, don't advance the plot, and don't advance their own character, and you're about ready to write the show off completely, they throw something like Bubbled at you.
Now, hold on with that. There's a few issues to bring up with this one, and the reason why I'm doing so is because this next section is gonna be a bit of a compliment sandwich from her. First off, let's say you're talking about the episodes before Bubbled that has the characters do nothing, has the plot not advance, or has no advancement on their own characters. But if we go back a few episodes, we find that, oh yeah, Bubbled is the last episode of an arc, in which we find out a lot of things about the plot. Beta, Earthlings, and Back to the Moon were all about the plot, the fight against Jasper, and the information that Rose Quartz killed Pink Diamond, something that the gems have been hiding from Steven, and something that he has to start to come to terms with in that very episode. Right before that was Bismuth, where Steven's morality gets turned on his head as he's forced to not only use violence to defend himself, but realize that his pacifism and naive kindness that worked with Lapis and Peridot and even the Cluster wouldn't work on all gems. We also get a bit of a hint of how Rose Quartz wasn't the type of gem she seemed like. Then there's Gem Hunt, Crack the Whip, and Steven vs. Amethyst before that, which set up the Jasper corruption hunting, something that's directly a part of an overarching subplot of the show. Not to mention, this entire arc from Crack the Whip, Steven vs. Amethyst, Beta, and Earthlings all help establish a flaw in Amethyst's character and help advance the character. And for the heck of it, let's look at 3 more episodes before that. While an episode like Greg the Babysitter doesn't seem like it does anything at first glance, it showcases how Greg developed responsibility, which is actually pretty great considering he's also a main character, as well as further insight into who Rose was. Alone at Sea not only brings Jasper back up, but is a significant development for Lapis's character as she realizes how her relationship with Jasper was a bad coping mechanism, and is able to recognize and realize that she was in an abusive relationship with her. Monster Reunion brings back Centipedal, a small subplot in which Steven tries to rehabilitate a victim of corruption, and learns about the circumstances that led to her corruption in the first place. Second off, this comment reveals a sort of skewed perspective on the show, one in which, if the characters don't advance the plot or advance their own characters, then the show doesn't do anything worthwhile. But I feel like the fact that entertainment of just having the characters interact is taken out of the equation for some reason. Well, I know the reason, but we'll get into it in a bit. And as a quick reminder, just in case some of you fell off here, I'm not criticizing Lily for saying that this is what she believes about the show. What I am criticizing is the perception that Lily has about these kinds of people, that she ends up using to inform her critique. Regardless of whether Lily believes this or not, the fact that she's using this at all in her critique is weird.
It's a quiet episode with a lot of really discordant music that does a lot to sell just how big an empty space is. How even if you manage to survive, you'd be adrift. you'd be completely and utterly alone forever.
And Steven's trapped with someone who wants him dead and doesn't know it yet. Not only is this the first time Steven hasn't been able to talk someone down, he's also on his own, and rescue isn't coming anytime soon.
First time? What about Jasper, which happened a few episodes ago? And in terms of being alone and unable to talk someone down, a few episodes before that was Bismuth. Actually, wait, consider this a side comment, but remember when you brought up earlier that criticism shines when you can compare it to when something fails? Well, if we take your rewritten part of the Bismuth section into account, in which you've had problems with how Bismuth tackles this, and talk about these aspects with that episode, then that would actually really help your criticism.
I honestly think it would have been a lot better without Eyeball. To have Steven do his usual I'm not paying attention to the danger I'm in shtick, and have it slowly reach the crescendo of that last moment as the reality that he is alone, adrift, and can't get back fully settles in on him. Really deconstructs Steven's tendency to goof off in tense situations. There really is no better way to have a character reflect on their decisions and their choices in life than to just set them adrift in space.
I'm not a fan of this blanket statement. Well, that could be one way to go about it. Having someone else there, most notably Steven, to work off of, helps to make sure that the audience knows what's going on, signal the start of reflection in some cases, or even bounce off emotions as someone who's able to notice certain behaviors and help each other out with it. Some examples include Garnet and Steven in keeping it together in helping Garnet conquer her fears, Lapis and Steven in Same Old World in helping Lapis find value in herself and Earth, Pearl and Steven in Rose's Scabbard in reflecting on Pearl's relationship with Rose, Amethyst and Steven in Tiger Millionaire in revealing Amethyst's insecurities, and Rose and Steven in Storm in the Room when discussing his feelings about his mom. Not only do these episodes communicate to the audience certain feelings, but they're able to talk about emotions outwardly in a way that feels natural to both their setting and the audience. Not only that, but they also avoid scenarios in which they don't really have the time to reflect on certain actions, whether it's due to being filled with panic, worry, depression, insecurities, or conflicting emotions that can get in the way of that reflection. We could also see that in the episode you point out as an example, where Steven is preoccupied, about to die from being in space, and inevitably passes out until the gems find him. Also, while this is subjective at the end of the day, one could argue that Steven learning it throughout the series is also a pretty great way to deconstruct this.
Then the next episode is an extended Roadrunner homage,
as well as an advancement of Peridot's character, learning that she shouldn't judge someone on shallow criteria just because they think differently from you.
Then the next episode is a game show montage where Steven and Amethyst are shown to suffer from self-worth issues through the vector of a game show,
which is an advancement of both Steven and Amethyst's thoughts about everything before Bubbled, and an advancement to both Pearl and Garnet by letting them know about it.
Then the next episode is a lore dump,
which advances the plot by telling us about the origins of Beach City and where the crystal gems were this entire time throughout the development of Beach City.
Then the next episode is bad,
which shows us an advancement on Steven's character by having him reflect on the fact that he couldn't help Jasper, Bismuth, or Eyeball, and thinking about it with their mom's disapproving look, acknowledging the fact that it weighs a ton on Steven's mind as he quietly backs away from and doesn't pay attention to his surroundings, offering a relatively quiet reflection on his actions, as well as learning a way to deal with said emotions, thanks to Garnet and Connie, as well as him being able to talk about it to someone. Also, I'm glad your opinion hasn't changed from that first video.
Mindful Education is one of the worst episodes of Steven Universe.
Also, you ignore that Bubbled was a season finale instead of just being plopped in the middle of these episodes, which is absolutely important context to explain why these episodes played after it.
This pattern of really good episodes then leading into an anime-inspired lore dump has confirmed what I believed for a while. The biggest problem with the show's writing is that everyone involved can make really good character drama, it's just that they would rather make anime references.
What?
You're going to hear a lot about how it pays homage to a whole host of anime, like Dragon Ball, or Sailor Moon and Revolutionary Utena.
That's a weird comparison.
So many of the good moments in this show are just when characters have to stop bounding around in badly animated fight scenes, or weird drug trip sequences, or crying speeches about redemption and friendship, and talk like normal people.
But these moments are few and far between, especially when you have an edict from on high mandating near constant peanut gallery.
Okay. Blaming Rebecca Sugar again and assuming ABC about the creative process again. Looks like that didn't change much from the first video either.
If you believe that it's all Cartoon Network's doing for the constant hiatuses, which I don't, Sugar should have caught on to this a while ago and written her episodes accordingly.
Oh, to be fair, I think this one is a joke as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'll take it as one for now.
It's been complained about before, but Steven has this rather unusual trait where Steven has to actually be present for an event in order for it to happen. So if you thought you could have a moment between Garnet and Pearl as they both talk about losing someone important to them, you can't get that because the show has to contrive a way for Steven to be there. And if he's there, he has to be the center of attention.
Yes, you can. If you want some examples of serious heart-to-hearts where Steven is there while not being the center of attention, there's the fight and reconciliation between Pearl and Amethyst in On the Run, the episode where they specifically tell Steven to stay out of this, and subsequently, Steven stays out of it because they talk about Amethyst's emotions when feeling inferior because of where she comes from. Or episodes like Barnmates and Raising the Barn, where the focus is on the friendship between Lapis and Peridot, rather than Steven being the center of attention. Heck, if you want that exact conversation about losing important people to each other with Steven not being the center of attention, then you have Talk to Each Other, the song in which, while Steven fuels the initial conversation, Greg and Pearl reconcile without needing Steven to stay the center of attention, as the focus is on Greg and Pearl. If you also want to talk about Rose, then we could talk about Friendship, in which Garnet and Pearl talk to each other about their issues and come to a better understanding of one another without Steven being the center of attention. Huh. I had the weirdest sense of deja vu.
There's an episode where Amethyst is excited for a rock concert, but when Greg bails on her, Pearl offers to drive instead, and then drags Steven along as well. The episode is interesting because most of it is dedicated to Pearl getting a crush on a woman who looks a lot like Rose, and it's probably the best episode primarily featuring Pearl living her life and moving forward with it.
But it's brought down by the fact that Steven has to be there making glib remarks the entire time. As much as I loathe the notion of critiquing an episode by wishing it was a different episode entirely, if this were a solo Pearl episode, it'd be great.
Didn't you just critique Bubbled by wishing it was an episode that didn't have Eyeball and had Steven alone instead? You know, wishing that an entire episode was made up of subtracting half of it and only having Steven float alone in space?
Pearl goes on a quiet road trip during the night, thinking about everything, resolving to move forward with her life, coming home a renewed person. Sometimes you just gotta go take a drive in the dark somewhere quiet to think about everything. Hey, the stuff with Amethyst going to her concert is just a framing device to get Pearl in a car and talking to buff Imoen anyway. You could do this the whole episode with no dialogue, just the car radio and some sound effects. Someone driving in a car at night is a surprisingly somber atmosphere. It's a shame a lot of shows don't use it.
Isn't Amethyst also there, trying to influence Pearl and how she can act cool, being the catalyst and the driving force behind this episode and the action she takes in actually talking to the girl and having her interact with her? Hold on, let me check real quick. Yeah, it seems like it.
But because we're not allowed to do anything without including Steven, instead the episode has to deal with his commentary the entire time.
Okay, nobody's gonna say it. She kinda looked like Mom. You noticed, I noticed, we all noticed.
Yes, Steven, we noticed. Now please shut the fuck up.
I feel like a lot of people neglect the role that Steven has in the episode, one which the episode actually points out. Steven's role in this story is to help rationalize Pearl's thinking by being a relatively grounded character in the scenario. Along with that, you seem to ignore the part that comes immediately after, which also shows a significant reason as to why he said that. The fact that Pearl still has a few attachments to the past that make her complacent in doing things. The thing that the entire episode focuses on in regards to Pearl's behavior. Also, it's pretty great that you can notice these things, Lily. You know who didn't? Amethyst.
This is a really good, quiet moment where Pearl can just think and you can soak in the visual storytelling they presumably care so much about. But no, Steven has to open his fucking mouth.
Because you can't have an audio-visual experience. Heck, while it ain't Fantasia, you can see it with how Pearl and Amethyst react to Steven's comment. And you could see that as visual storytelling.
And the worst part is that this is not something the show has to do. Fans argue, well, he's the main character, but lots of shows have main characters. They still take time to give other people a moment in the spotlight. But if this were a show just about him, that would be fine. But oftentimes the show has episodes focusing on other people and what they think and feel, and the writers have to awkwardly shove Steven in there for it to happen. And once he's there, everything just proceeds like a normal show. It's like a fucking Kingdom Hearts cutscene where things play out as they did in the source material, but Sora, Donald, and Goofy are just there in the background.
And the reason why this matters is because Steven's greatest strength is his emotional intelligence, and having him there helps the gems since they have trouble with emotional intelligence. There's a lot of scenarios like that, from Amethyst to Tiger Millionaire, to Pearl and Rose's Scabbard, to Peridot and Kindergarten Kid, to Lapis and Same Old World. Also, while I will agree, this is a bit further than what Red Van Buskirk said about the show when they used this exact same point, it's still the same point at the end of the day, or at least the framework is definitely taken from that point.
It's gotten to the point that if the show wants to have an episode even slightly unique and focus on someone else, they still have to shove Steven into the background, despite the fact that the episode would work just as fine, if not better, without him taking up screen time.
This is most egregious in Last One Out of Beach City, where the episode is entirely about Pearl seducing some human lady who looks like Rose, and also Steven is there. He's been shoved into the episode just because the show has mandated that he always be here, despite the fact that the episode would work just as well, if not better, if he wasn't hogging screen time.
Which has the same problem as that bit. Just because it isn't a show about him, that doesn't mean we can't just have information be sent through a single viewpoint, like a narrator.
This is the biggest contributor for why the story is often so rushed and slapdash. In a normal show, it will often cut away to the villains so you can actually know what they're doing and thinking, or sometimes side characters will have their time in the spotlight. It's an essential part of storytelling that has pretty much been the standard for films and television since they figured out you could cut film and stick bits of it together and it just works. But here, it just doesn't happen because Steven isn't there to see it happen.
I feel like this point falls apart when you think about how first-person storytelling is actually a thing that exists. If you want prominent examples, you could try The Great Gatsby or Hunger Games or even Sherlock Holmes, which respectively tells the stories from the perspectives of Nick, Katniss, and Watson, but maybe it's because they've come from books. So instead, if we go to film, we have a lot of Disney and Pixar films, from Moana to Turning Red to Cars and even Zootopia. And aside from kids movies, we also have films like Jojo Rabbit and Everything Everywhere All at Once. Even if we narrow it down a bit more to TV shows, we have Doctor Who, in which the story focuses on Doctor Who's perspective, and even Western cartoons. We can look at Infinity Train Book 1, which focuses entirely on Tulip, and Over the Garden Wall, focusing on Wirt and Greg and only separating at the very end when dealing with the creature haunting the forest.
Yellow and Blue Diamond had a very sudden switch in the final arc where it turns out that they've been questioning Homeworld's fascist dictatorship for a long time. Would have been nice to have seen that at all, but Steven was too busy hanging out with Onion for 20 episodes.
I was wondering when we get to some Diamond talk. While I can see that it's sudden, it's not entirely because this was rushed, because it really is, but more so that this is also their face turn moment. The moment in which the characters realize how bad their actions are, thanks to a specific event or an emotional overload. Not necessarily rushed characterization. While I made a list of these in the Lapis video, there's a lot of moments like this, the most famous ones being from Christmas Carol and The Grinch, but we've seen a lot of them in recent years. If we were to analyze everything that we see Blue and Yellow do, we could start from Steven's dream, where we see Blue Diamond crying over Pink and her colony, and how it'll be over soon, in which we see Blue absolutely devastated over Pink. Afterwards, in That'll Be All, we see that not only does Yellow also miss Pink, confirming why she wants the Earth to be gone, but also puts value into Blue's emotional state. We see this further in The Trial, in which we see visual storytelling, showcasing how much that, despite Yellow seeing Rose as an absolute threat that must be stopped, she restrains herself for the sake of Blue's emotional closure. After reaching Homeworld in Familiar, we learn about how the Diamonds being led by White Diamond never feel hurt or anything like that, and learn how they have to stick to specific behaviors in order to appease White Diamond. At the same time, we also learn that they don't really think they could change any of it due to White Diamond's control, and it was only thanks to Steven emotionally reaching the Diamonds that they were able to realize that they were each suffering, and weren't really allowed to let it out thanks to their statuses as Diamonds, that it was White Diamond's rule and the standards that they had to achieve by being as ruthless as possible, that what they did, despite being in a comfortable enough space to ignore the effects of their reign, was a result of this that ended up with them the way they are, after ignoring how they affected Pink and each other.
So many characters have issues and trauma that they have to work through but can't because Steven has to be there or they aren't allowed to. If Steven doesn't bother to check up on them, you never learn about them at all.
As a therapist, I think I can field at least the first part of this question. Okay, go for it. You see, I'm sure you've gone through several ups and downs in your life, trying to make yourself better, but progress never really turns out to be linear. Sometimes friends can't see the progress you've made, and sometimes you can't see your own progress. But no matter where you stop and start watching, progress is being made, if someone is going out of their way to fix it. But if it's never really brought up to someone, or if someone doesn't realize that it's a big problem, they can't really realize what problem it is so they can improve it. And there's a lot of times in which they do work through their trauma, even without Steven. If you want an example, we could see Peridot being able to improve bit by bit when Lapis left in raising the barn. While Back to the Kindergarten shows her feeling a bit depressed about the whole situation, we can see her being able to help everyone out and put away those feelings and can't go back. Heck, if we want the biggest example of this, look at Lapis. We start from Mirror Gem and Ocean Gem, in which we learn about Lapis Lazuli being trapped in a mirror, and how she didn't trust anyone, eventually taking the world's ocean and being healed by Steven. The Return and Jailbreak show her thinking about accepting her fate when she informed everyone in the message, but trying to get control of anything by being part of Malachite. Saving Steven and the gems from trapping herself on Earth while keeping everyone safe from Jasper, and using a bit of it to cope, though it was in a poor way, as we see in Chili Teed and Super Watermelon Island. From Same Old World and Barnmates, we explore Lapis' trauma and her dealing with all the symptoms of PTSD, while Steven calms her down with cognitive behavioral therapy, as well as her beginning to befriend a gem like Peridot, who she sees as earnestly trying to improve. In Alone at Sea, we see Lapis come to terms with how these behaviors made her feel, and then we see Jasper trying to restart their relationship with one another, for no other reason than gaining power and control to have the identity of Malachite through manipulation and abusive techniques, not truly caring about Lapis, to which Lapis stands up for herself, realizing that their relationship wasn't healthy, and leaving her. Then, in Beta, Gem Harvest, the new Crystal Gems, and Room for Ruby, we see how Lapis improves in her behavior, being able to deal with her own faults and opening herself up to others more readily. While Raising the Barn and Can't Go Back show that Lapis is still haunted and does rash decisions that relate to her trauma, we see that she shows regret in doing so, that she desperately wants to fight the concerns that she has, but the pain of what she went through pulls her back too much, which culminates in Reunited, when she returns and showcases how much she's actually improved from her trauma, to the point where she's able to fight alongside the gems against the diamonds, the beings who scared her the most. There's that deja vu again.
Getting back to Last One Out of Beach City, that episode ends with Pearl getting a girl's number and showing some sign of moving on with her life. This is never followed up on, and this girl, who is only known as Mystery Girl by the Phantom, never appears again. This is a recurring problem, and honestly, removing Steven's perspective from the equation wouldn't actually solve it, because the real problem at play is that the crew doesn't care.
They let Pearl hook up with a cute buff lady, but they didn't want to revisit it because they just didn't care. They'd rather do 6 episodes about Sadie's band.
Or maybe, instead of assuming that the crew doesn't care, this could also be a symbol of moving on, not trying to base her life solely on protecting or being with someone else to validate her existence, like she did with Rose Quartz. Along with that, I feel like this also ignores the fact that Sadie is also a main character, which, to be fair, a lot of people forget, but just because she's not gem stuff doesn't mean that she's less important to Steven's universe comparatively.
So many characters, often main characters, are left critically underdeveloped because the writers are too busy making joke episodes and callbacks to other shows they like. As much as we can blame the Force Steven perspective, it's ultimately the showrunner who decides what the show is going to be about.
Should I make a counter? I'm gonna make a counter. Bringing up the one at 5 minutes in, there's 2 times that you specifically talked about the showrunner and or talked about them being a problem specifically, going out of your way to disrespect them. Are you gonna bring up that one time an interjection ago when she said that the crew didn't care? Potentially I could, but I want to showcase something very specific with this counter.
Peridot is the only character who gets to have scenes where Steven isn't present. Granted, the entire premise of the episode is Steven listening to her tape recorder, but fuck it, I'll take a half-assed approach to telling a story like a normal person.
Wait, if that framing device is the thing that counts to it, the one episode as a matter of fact, then what about the framing device of story for Steven? Like with how Greg met Rose, how Garnet first fused, Pearl's secret in a single pale rose, how Pink Diamond turned into Rose. Actually, I might as well save that one for later. But my point still stands that even if we go by this logic, then most characters have these scenes without Steven.
This is the only time you get to see characters interact with each other without Steven's running commentary. Hell, she spends most of it interacting with Garnet, another character who desperately needed some real screen time. God, Jesse Zook did not deserve the shit this show's garbage fandom gave them.
What? Hi there, Jesse Zook mention. How are you doing there? Despite my vast knowledge of Steven Universe, I know little about this, except that it's apparently from the shipping drama of Lapis and Peridot, but Lily bringing up info about the cast and crew is also giving me a bit of deja vu.
This is what happens when you spend time with a character and do more than one thing with them. Peridot becomes such an interesting character because you see so many different avenues of her explored. Homeworld's fascist dictatorship means she has to unlearn fascist propaganda, understand fusion, learn to love living beyond just being a cog in the machine. It's so good, and she becomes visibly happier as a result.
That's a nice statement. Now let's think about it for a bit. In actuality, all of the Crystal Gems deal with these sorts of arcs. Amethyst has an arc about beating her insecurities and inadequacies. Pearl has an arc about doing what the loss of Rose, and Garnet has an arc about being more open and dealing with emotions. To top it off, all 3 of them have learned some sort of inspiration or message from Rose Quartz. Amethyst found worth in her body being the way it was. Pearl discovered the joys of independence while basking in the presence of Rose. Garnet was able to feel joy about being who she was thanks to Rose's approval. And with Rose gone, all 3 of them have had to essentially go through that entire arc for themselves, but without the Rose-centered thinking. Amethyst found worth with the way that she was, because she was able to find comfort not with someone someone greater than her validating her, but someone just like her being with her and helping her how he can. Pearl was able to put more self-worth on who she is, not relying on Rose's approval or anyone's, and truly becoming independent. Garnet was able to fuse again thanks to them being able to find new meaning in their love without the need for Rose's approval. As a result, they all became visibly happier. And lastly, while those things are pretty neat, what about someone who has to deal with their trauma from the Gem War, understand what it means to change, and then learn to love living to the point where they become visibly happier as a result? Like Lapis.
And she's the only one who gets this. They had so many ideas for Peridot and they were like, let's do all of them. I would have loved to see that kind of passion, dedication, and care given to the entire main cast. It's actually quite surprising just how little time is spent on the main characters. Go back over most episodes and keep a tally of how many are actually about a main character and how many do anything substantial with them that opens a new avenue for them or moves their arc forward.
If you say so. I already did this for Lapis, but if you were wondering the reason for those stars, well, now you know. Spoilers, I'm going to be doing this with all the characters at some point, but for now, let's look through Amethyst. First, she has Tiger Millionaire, moving her arc about inadequacy as a crystal gem and it being addressed. Giant Woman, where she saves a gem while building up her relationship with Pearl. On the Run, which also embraces her inadequacy being an Earth gem and reconciling it with Pearl. Maximum Capacity, which expressed Amethyst's insecurities as a friend towards Greg and her trying to be on better terms with Greg. Reformed, focusing on her insecurity as someone who doesn't feel like she was designed as someone that the others would want around them. After Onion Friend, there's Too Far, focusing on Amethyst and her coping mechanism of self-depreciation, and when it could go too far. After Too Short to Ride, an episode in which Amethyst tries to help Peridot feel more confident about her body the way that she has, we get a bunch of episodes in another arc. Crack the Whip, Steven vs. Amethyst, Beta, and Earthlings all focus on Amethyst trying to find some sort of way she could prove herself that her body was fine the way it was, but getting that confirmation through Steven, who is able to meet her on her level and relate to her. We have Last One Out of Beach City, where she goes to a concert, 3 Gems and a Baby, in which we see Amethyst develop by seeing where she began and learning that she should be more responsible, at least for Steven. Then Tiger Philanthropist, showing that Amethyst is finished developing. That Will Be All has her meet with the other kindergartners and feel a bit of acceptance as family. Back to the Kindergarten has Amethyst help Peridot deal with Lapis leaving, while learning more about where she came from thanks to Peridot's information. And lastly, What's Your Problem has Amethyst put aside her trauma at the hand of Rose Quartz, being Pink Diamond, and not unload it all to Steven, and tries to be the one to comfort Steven instead of the other way around, showing that she does indeed still feel like an equal to Steven in some way, and this is discounting guidance in which Amethyst finds a purpose in teaching other gems. We can compare this to Peridot, who we get introduced to in Marble Madness, trying to kill the gems, and going along with Jasper's plan in The Return and Jailbreak before escaping. After a while, they finally catch her in Catch and Release, where she opens up to Steven, learns about what makes the Earth special and When It Rains, learns not to judge someone based on their status while opening up to the rest of the gems in Back to the Barn, and Too Far, learning about boundaries and how to focus on handling emotions when it comes to befriending people. It could have been great had her unlearning diamond-based thinking and realizing how it becomes a detriment. Message Received has her realize that Yellow Diamond was not objective and had her finally stand up against her. Logdate 7152 had her willing to understand Garnet, a concept that was highly uncomfortable to her. Gem Drill had her and Steven drilled to the core to stop a massive bioweapon called the Cluster. Barmaids had her trying her best to reconcile her relationship with Lapis and help her start anew. Too Short to Ride has Peridot address and deal with her own insecurities that, while partially dealt with on Homeworld, is something she has to find out herself when on Earth. Kindergarten Kid has her develop in realizing that even gems that she feels are logistically inferior to her still have a different way of thinking that she just doesn't understand. And finally, Raising the Barn and Back to the Kindergarten have Peridot tried to express her emotions about staying on Earth with Lapis, and dealing with the sadness that comes with Lapis leaving instead, while using future episodes to improve in her own ways. And this is ignoring In Dreams, which showcases the connection between Peridot and Steven, feeling weird now that there are no world-ending threats. Ooh boy, that was a lot. But my point with this is that they each have a relatively similar number of episodes focusing on them, but more to the point, they each have a similar amount of episodes that involve moving forward the arcs that they have. Lapis is 10, while Amethyst and Peridot both have 12. I think the reason a lot of the fanbase thinks this is because it gets spread out between multiple seasons for some characters, while other characters like Peridot and Garnet have a few front-loaded episode arcs. Another reason is that the main characters had a bigger variety of problems to deal with that dealt with different struggles of theirs, with the biggest ones being their relationships with one another and that of rose quartz. And dealing with them together ends up building their arcs more than just being between the gems that are alive, like Tiger Millionaire and Giant Woman building up Amethyst's relationship with the other gems, and the Smoky Quartz saga with her insecurities. Some of them double dip, but they still focus on the characters themselves.
Those are actually about some rando in Beach City who are usually one-note joke characters, and the ones that are actually about the main cast usually just rehashes something they've already done. Even Steven, oh, I remember that show? The character who is legally mandated to always be on screen at all times is criminally underdeveloped. Name 5 things about Steven that aren't compassion, trauma, fat, savior complex, or Connie.
Oh, I guess if Connie's a trait, then I could just do Garnet, Amethyst, Pearl, Peridot, and Greg. But in all seriousness, there's optimism, being supportive, outgoing, naive, and generally friendly.
What does he like? What keeps him going every day? How does he actually feel about the other gems? What does he want to do when he grows up? So much time with Steven is spent watching him fix other people's problems like he's the fucking messiah. The most interesting thing they can do with him is have him crack under the stress.
Okay, I guess we're doing this. You see, this isn't just about the original series anymore. Oh no, my dear viewers. This is also including future. You know, the time when we get to see all of these questions answered in one form or another. He likes the crystal gems, Connie, Greg, and just generally helping people. We see this to an obsessive degree with a bunch of episodes like Guidance, a very special episode, and Everything's Fine. What keeps him going every day is indeed his family being there to support him, and the thought of being able to actually do more good, hence episodes like Snow Day and Little Graduation. We get a good sense of how he feels about the other gems in Prickly Pear, in which Steven's insecurities are manifested through Cactus Steven. And if you are familiar with the ending, in which he gets comforted by his family after going through a mental breakdown, we find out what he wants to do when growing up in the future, that being him charting his own course like Greg did, a chance to explore the world that he saved multiple times. Hell, even if we're gonna ignore future, most of these questions have been given enough development to answer them for the OG Steven, like his desire to heal the corrupted gems, have adventures, learn about his mom, how he feels about gems like Garnet and Pearl keeping secrets from him, but still looking up to them, as well as seeing Amethyst as an equal in that regard, wanting to be everything that everybody wants him to be when he's grown, stuff like that.
But even when that story ends, he just moves away and the show ends, waiting to be renewed again so we can all experience the second coming of Steven.
Wow, it's almost like he finished his arc and actually found out what he wanted to do when he grows up. Go figure.
Steven doesn't really get his own story. His entire story is cleaning up the mess left by his deadbeat mom, and so most of the time spent with him that isn't him dicking around is just learning more secrets about his birth mom. That's great for the people who make theory videos and like speculating. There's no shortage of mysteries to solve and content to mill, especially given the fact that most of them are just never going to be answered, so you'll never be...
But it's all mystery and no payoff, because at the end it's just, well, I guess that's a whole lot of stuff we now know.
With Steven learning about his mom and the things that she did, he also tries to help out the gems or his human friends whenever he sees them in trouble. Initially trying to follow his mom's footsteps and be as great as he can be, trying his best to help gems like Lapis, Peridot, or the corrupted gems. But soon after learning what she did to gems like Bismuth and Pink Diamond, his footsteps change to the point where he doesn't even know how he feels about those same footsteps. He's learning as time goes on that situations aren't as cut and dry as he initially thought, and learned about the massive responsibilities that she left behind, and how she affected so many other gems and people. From then, he has to realize that if he's carrying on her legacy, does that mean that he'll turn out like her? And if so, would that be against the very ideals she was known to protect? If his whole life is modeled after that fact, does he truly have any individuality? Is he just Rose Quartz? Is he just Pink Diamond? Who is he? Steven's story isn't just cleaning up the mess that his mom makes, but what does that make him in relation to his mom? Knowing who truly was his mom in all of this. And yes, all of this gets answered through episodes like Storm in the Room, Single Pale Rose, and Now We're Only Falling Apart, which showcase who she was, how she felt, and why she did what she did. But this is the same problem as before, where she generalizes and undermines the development of a character like Steven.
Getting back to Pearl, I find her story is most emblematic of this unwillingness to take a step forward, because Pearl has a lot of time spent with her, but it's all time spent recycling the same story, that being Pearl's grief over losing the love of her life.
Gee, it's almost like the same story has affected her in a variety of ways, like it did to people like Steven and Amethyst. We start with Giant Woman, in which her and Amethyst collaborate with one another to save a gem. In Steven the Sword Fighter and Coach Steven, Pearl tries to teach Steven certain lessons about life, but gets thrown off through either either dying or the impressive nature of Sugilite. Pearl's true beginning in regards to her arcs comes with Space Race, as she felt joy from being an explorer of space. A pioneer, one might say. Warp Tour is an episode that's also about Pearl trying to teach Steven something, but getting proven wrong by him. We get a continuation of that explorer of space joy when we get to Rose's Scabbard, in which Pearl gets to express how important Rose was to her, and how she felt as if she shared everything with her, bringing out the grief of her loss, knowing that she couldn't truly share everything with her. We get something similar with Sworn to the Sword, where we learn about how it ties to Pearl's own self-worth and philosophy as a fighter, and her learning to go against that view and value herself instead. We then get to We Need to Talk, where we get to see Pearl's relationship with Rose before Greg was taken seriously, and see the jealousy that she has in regards to that fact. Then there's Cry for Help, in which she tries to fill said emptiness with Garnet, and then after Historical Friction, in which she retells an accurate version of Beach City's history, we have Friendship, in which she gets advice from Garnet to be her own gem and to control her own destiny so that she can move forward. Then we get back to the barn, in which Pearl tries to move past her role as a servant in general with her skills against Peridot. Then there's Mr. Greg, in which Pearl finally gets confronted with the reality that Rose chose Greg over her, and trying to find out why she still feels this way about him, to which they confront it by talking about it with one another, and being able to move towards a better relationship with one another. Then, in Last One Out of Beach City, Pearl is trying to move to the future while trying to avoid her mistakes of the past, as we see her trying to reach beyond her comfort zone without having Rose look over her. We then get to see how Rose's death truly impacted Pearl in 3 Gems and a Baby, and how despite everything, she'd try her best to respect Rose's wishes. And before we get an episode where Pearl familiarizes herself and everyone else about how Homeworld works in Familiar, we get A Single Pale Rose and Now We're Only Falling Apart, in which we see how Pink Diamond became Rose Quartz, and experiencing what Pearl had to go through for the sake of protecting and helping Rose, as well as how Rose changed her perspective on certain things. And this is ignoring volleyball, and how despite how far she's come, she's still trapped in the framework of being a Pearl by making excuses for Rose, and, knowing the full story, trying to break away from it. There's that deja vu again. Also, I promise this will be the last long-winded rebuttal for a bit.
Now, the nature of pearls is weird. It's very clearly chattel slavery, but Becky often denies that, so it's clear this wasn't intended. But that's not a very complicated topic. Becky's not very smart, tried to do one thing, smashed her face into a wall, whatever, I get it.
Wait just a moment. Chattel slavery? As in slavery?
I'll take this one. You go ahead and have a bit of a walk.
No, I got this one. I'm calm. I'm cool. Okay, so the history of chattel slavery is obviously a lot to talk about for this video, but it seems more likely that she's a servant or a maid than she is an actual slave of sorts. The only people who talk about having a pearl are high royalty, or people who imagine themselves to be high royalty, like Eyeball or even Peridot. While some slaves worked as housemaids, that's the key. They could just be housemaids, instead of overgeneralizing them as slaves, who encompass a lot more. I sorta get where she's coming from, though. If you hear a whole type of gem that's forced into following their role due to how they were born, it would make sense for you to come to the conclusion of chattel slavery. But this doesn't make sense when literally all of the gems are forced into having roles due to how they were born, including the diamonds. Heck, an insect colony has that same thing. They weren't sold into this process, nor were they brought into it. It's just part of their nature. Meanwhile, if you look at pearls as servants or maids rather than slaves, there's a lot more evidence supporting this point. Peridot describes them as gems that are made to order servants, which fits when Rose calls her my pearl, and when Jasper refers to Pearl as a defective pearl. There's a bit of evidence pointing to it too, so it's weird that you went in a way that nobody was pointing to, not even for a split second.
I'll also add in my 2 cents here and say, for the sake of this point, in the old video, Lily brought up an interview in which they referred to Pearl as if Alfred was in love with Batman.
Much of what made Pearl interesting in that she was dealing with loss over a loved one and that love being unrequited, which is something never done with a gay character, was destroyed once it was revealed that Pearl was literally Rose's slave. Sugar actually went on to an interview to describe the dynamic between them as if Alfred was in love with Batman. Not Bruce, just Batman.
And from my knowledge, Alfred was Batman's butler, so it makes sense there as well.
So the thing about Pearl is that her story never gets to move forward. Pearl is where Becky wears her Revolutionary Girl Utena jacket the most, and the thing about Revolutionary Girl Utena is that it didn't really end in a way that gave anyone closure. At the end, Utena gets lost in the realm of darkness and Anthe goes off looking for her, and they're never seen again until a few more corporate acquisitions puts them in the next Kingdom Hearts game. So when that's your inspiration, your story is already kinda doomed to never come to a satisfying conclusion, because melancholy grief is kinda all the show has going for it.
First off, just because you're inspired by something, that doesn't mean that you'll take those elements wholesale. Second, the implication that a character's trauma can't be resolved in a satisfying conclusion is weird. I get it, this is fiction, but Steven Universe specifically goes out of its way to talk about these issues seriously, especially for someone living for thousands of years, dealing with this perspective over the last few decades or so.
There is an interesting theme in there about how you can't save someone from abuse by emulating the system that abused them in the first place, but it's buried under symbolism and knives. It runs a gauntlet of serious subjects that could have all served an entire show on their own, but here they're all haphazardly thrown into Darling Baby's trough, and most people only remember the show for being gay and covering heavy topics at all, and not about how well it does.
Hell, most of the topics people claim it covers aren't actually in the show. It's in Adolescence of Utena, basically a movie rewrite that came out later.
Because it's blasphemy to say that she wasn't also inspired by the movie along with the show.
This is why any show inspired by Utena tends to have the same problems of just not grappling with cause and effect and cycling through serious issues without actually taking them seriously. Because nobody who watches Utena as an adult sees a revolutionary step forward in gay rep in anime. What they see is a fucking mess. But if you were a gay 13-year-old back in the 90s, this show and bootleg copies of Sailor Moon were all you had.
Steven Universe doesn't take serious issues seriously? I hope you're not referring to things like Lapis' PTSD, or Steven's PTSD, or any trauma anyone has, which, whether or not you think it works, is taken seriously. Also, geez Lily, way to just throw Utena fans under the bus here.
It certainly is an experience, but if you asked me to find a model for writing stories about abuse or gay relationships, this would not be a show I would tell you to emulate. It already does way more than its writer is capable of handling, and a fan of that is not going to improve on it in any way. So what you end up with is almost Revolutionary Girl Utena fanfiction, and you have to remember that Utena was already Princess Knight fanfiction, and after a certain point, you're just inbreeding.
This is assuming that Steven Universe takes away that it portrays gay relationships whole cloth from Utena, as well as assuming they do it in the exact same way. And hell, even if they do, they could add some context or something that makes it understandable in some way, shape, or form, or adds to it in some way. If we go into the realm of fiction, Super Danganronpa Another is a good example, taking its world and twists from Danganronpa 2, but changing it up by keeping the digital world as a vital plot point to the game, rather than just a last case. And what about working in their own experiences, subversions, and heck, even concepts, like with what Utena did to Princess Knight? Steven Universe does this with Steven himself questioning who he is, and basically all the gems questioning why Rose was Rose, and how it affected all of them as subversion to the Chosen One formula. How many kid hero stories have we had that not only question the world that they live in and what they enforce, but do so while maintaining the kid hero formula, like with My Hero Academia and Naruto questioning hero society and kid soldier protocols? What about superhero stories that criticize or subvert the world of superheroes while still being a superhero story, like with Invincible or One Punch Man? Then there's a movie like Scream, clearly inspired by horror films and making a villain so inspired by them that he tries emulating them instead of a supernatural force like with Freddy Krueger or Jason. Or an adult sitcom inspired by other adult sitcoms but criticizing the world that they take place in and taking their issues seriously while also critiquing celebrity culture, like with BoJack. Or even if you want direct inspiration that takes a core idea in a different way, we have RPGs like Earthbound and Live Alive inspiring Undertale, a game that takes it in a completely different direction. Finally, if you want a product that's essentially fanfiction taken whole cloth from another work and improving it in every way, then look no further than RZ, a game directly inspired by the Zelda CDI games.
It's why you have all those American-made shows about kids going to anime warrior school, and the fact that there's such a thing as anime warrior school is just never questioned, because a show they liked had it, and also Harry Potter.
This feels weird to bring up, but if you're using High Guardian Spice as an example, then you need to remember that in that show, they actually do explain their purpose, albeit poorly. That being that they go to anime warrior school because they're guardians.
So Pearl's story keeps running that treadmill because where else is it going to go? They wanted it to be like Utena, but because Utena has an open ending, you're kinda stuck with it. Now that's fine for Utena because it only had 40 episodes and it's serialized. Steven Universe has 180. That's certainly a long time to do fuck all.
Doesn't Steven Universe have other characters to focus on instead of someone like Pearl? Like, I get it, this part is about Pearl, but you keep bringing her up in relation to the show, and it gets really distracting when you just subvert from the topic so much to talk about other stuff that it gets really annoying.
Also, one more thing. As someone who has seen Utena, it did end up being rather conclusive. You see, Anthe actually was able to leave the school. That's something that she was trying to escape from because she was forced into that cycle throughout her entire life. And Utena, trying to save her, actually opened her eyes to the possibility that she can indeed escape.
Wait, you've seen Utena?
Indeed, I have.
Oh, that's perfect, because we're gonna need your help.
The crew is aware of this too because they spend a lot of time distracting the viewer with shiny baubles, particularly musical numbers. When people try to point to this story being done well, they usually point to Mr. Greg because Pearl sings about how Rose chose Greg over her, and it's certainly loud and epic and climactic as Pearl does her best impression of a Kingdom Hearts character, but it's hollow and empty. It's using a musical number to sort of yada yada over the fact that you're watching Pearl do this song and dance, literally, for the 10th goddamn time.
Is this really the 10th time that Pearl has tried to reconcile her feelings towards Greg now that Rose is gone? Also, ignoring what happens immediately after the song, where they are finally able to build a path forward, being able to talk about their mutual loss of Rose and how it both affected them.
Steven Universe likes to pretend it's weaving this intricate plot web, but like most stories, they're making it up as they go along. But presumably, Rose had a secret identity was scribbled on a post-it note somewhere, and this is the only place where it feels like they thought about that.
Hold up a minute. I remember from the first video that Lily had the same sort of doubt about Pink Diamond being planned out.
Now, I can already hear you angrily typing out your comments that, well, actually, Sugar intended this to be the revelation from the very beginning, and they loved all the hints. It was hinted at from the very start. And I'm gonna stop you right there and say, no, it wasn't. She is fucking with you. Now, here's where I'm gonna spoil a writer's trick for everyone. You see, if you want to have a twist, but you don't know what that twist is going to be, you can let clues throughout a series that are so vague, you can warp them to retroactively mean whatever you want. You're exploiting hindsight bias to trick people into thinking your writing is smarter than it actually is. Those aren't hints that Rose is Pink Diamond. They're hints that something happened. A something that was vague enough so as to technically fit once Sugar actually decided what it was.
In any case, I do have something I want to bring up. You see, for the longest time, there's been this metaphor that's been used for literary analysis about curtains being blue, in which an author describes a window with blue curtains, and analysts are investigating what it means. While it's been derided for being something where analysts are looking at things that aren't really there, better interpretation of it is that just because you can't personally see a reason as to why the curtains would be blue, doesn't mean that the possibility isn't there. It's just that your interpretation of the story and what the story is going for is different. Not that it factually is the same.
We also have proof of that being the case, by the way, as well as every single time that Pearl closes her mouth with her hands.
Anyway, the reason this episode is so good is because when Steven finally chases Pearl down, Pearl just talks, mostly to herself, and we get her processing her feelings out loud. And one thing we really learn here is that Pearl hasn't really accepted that Pink is really gone. She openly wonders if Steven has her memories. Pearl really is aimless and adrift, alone for the first time in her life. She doesn't know what to do.
Remember what I said about how the show never lets a quiet moment sit? Well, here it does. So if you thought you could have a moment between Garnet and Pearl as they both talk about losing someone important to them, you can't get that because the show has to contrive a way for Steven to be there.
Whoa, what was that?
Oh, pardon me. That's one of my little friends. I call him, Replay.
Oh, hi, Replay.
I'm your therapist. Who else?
Okay.
No, he's an extraordinary little fellow. He can repeat whatever other people say.
Oh, like Lapis in the Mirror.
Oh boy, you really had to tie it into Steven Universe, huh? Anyways, you go ahead and do your thing.
Sure thing. Whoops, how did that get there? Looks like Steven isn't the center of attention here either.
This moment is absolutely beautiful. It's one of the most gut-wrenching moments I have ever seen in a cartoon, and it didn't need a big flashy dance number, fight scene, or death trap to do it. It didn't need a celebrity cameo or a guest animator to do it. All it needed was a writer who knew what the fuck they were doing.
Ugh, enough with the guest animators and celebrity cameos. Just gonna skip past this point. It's making me too mad.
Actually, hold on. I feel like this point here undermines what the entire show's content has in store.
What do you mean?
I mean, these comments are talking about a guest animator helping out in Mindful Education, or Nicki Minaj appearing in Coach Steven, but none of those additions really subtract from the overall experience.
Ooh, okay. I think that's a bit fair. Along with that, there's the fact that she brings up flashy dance musicals and fight scenes, which we've seen a bit of already and we'll get more into in a bit, but it's more a symbol of how Lily doesn't really understand the visual storytelling that is demonstrated by certain scenes, nor the general emotional fulfillment one can get from fight scenes or musical numbers.
Sorry, did I say knew what the fuck they were doing? I meant decided to actually put in some work that day. I've said this the whole time, Becky can make great art when she's not getting distracted by anime references references and her fucking giggle squee.
I want to point out that the only anime Lily brought up so far is Revolutionary Prince Utena.
This is what Rose's story was missing for most of the show. We don't need to necessarily know who Rose is, we just need to know someone who did, and Pearl got a lot of screen time, but screen time in Steven Universe doesn't equate to development. Between Rose's scabbard and volleyball, Pearl's grief is usually wallpapered over with musical numbers.
It seems like you don't recognize the significance of musical numbers, especially in Steven Universe. Like, someone's development can absolutely be spread through songs, whether it's expressing to the audience certain plot points or character traits, like with What's the Use of Feeling Blue, Change Your Mind, or Do It For Her, or just being a general emotional outburst, like it is with It's Over, Isn't It, Tower of Mistakes, and Stronger Than You.
This really comes to a head in the bad version of Rose's scabbard, volleyball. During this episode, while trying to heal Pink Pearl's scar, always a silly notion, scars don't actually heal, Pearl takes the two of them to the reef to try and repair her. But it turns out that the scar on her face isn't an injury. It's from an injury that was so impactful that it manifested as a part of her physical form. So it's a scar.
And if you look to your left, you'll see Lily in the process of missing potential symbolism with Pink Pearl's scar as a visible showcase of how Pink affected her.
This does have a good moment where Pink Pearl says she's fine and her scar spreads to immediately contradict her. She's just like me. Okay, I said that as a joke, but like, during the writing of this video, I actually did make another appointment with my therapist and unpack the fact that the only positive relationship I had as a child was a lie, and was actually quite abusive, and that's partly why I'm so bad at having relationships with people. So if a moment like this ever makes you go, oh, she's just like me for real, just stop and think about that for a minute. Okay, let's continue.
I probably can't bring that stuff up, right?
No, you can't.
What's the point of this interjection?
It's the fact that Lily is using this little editor's note to try and give advice to people and build a sympathetic profile for herself. While I understand you're using this to say that you care about your audience, telling them to get help if they can, I feel like you could have given this advice without screeching your video to a halt to talk about your therapy. Is it nitpicking? Who knows, maybe. But also keep this in the back of your mind as well.
Okay, so Pearl assumes it was white, but when Pink Pearl corrects her and says it was pink, Pearl goes into full denial because this is a pink diamond Pearl never knew. A childish brat who threw destructive tantrums and kept breaking her toys. It's an interesting moment where both of them have to confront the fact that at some point Pink Diamond changed from explosive and angry to reclusive and secret.
Or at least it would be if Steven didn't throw a tantrum and accidentally trap them both in a lobotomy clam, and so now they have to have the really short version of that scene from Rose's scabbard before quickly fusing into another Utena reference and having a rushed action scene. My god, you were almost there!
Okay, let's get into this one by one, because despite how rushed this scene is, Lily actually missed a lot. First, Lily fails to acknowledge what Steven's tantrum is about, that being Steven's mother, the person who he's had to deal with for so much throughout his journey, the fact that people have tried to kill him for that reason, and tried to kill his family over that reason, and the fact that his mom screwed with everyone's head for so long, and Steven doesn't want to explore that and move away from it. Second,
so if you thought you could have a moment between Garnet and Pearl as they both talk about losing someone important to them, you can't get that because the show has to contrive a way for Steven to be there.
But you can have something like that for Pearl and Volleyball when they're trapped in the shell. And lastly, you completely gloss over the visual storytelling of the scene, where we see Volleyball fall in pain, remembering the behavior that Pink inflicted on her, and seeing Pearl look back surprised as they both get trapped in the shell. It's then when Pearl is able to tell Volleyball and relate to her. Not that Pearl trusted Rose so much that she can't believe that she was keeping secrets, but that after all this time, she can't help but react the same way to the information. Still getting so emotionally invested with her to the point of negating the experience with a character who arguably knows more than she does, not because she values Rose, but because she can't move past Rose. They then end up in the clam, which ends up reverting themselves to their factory settings, as you so crassly put it. The same thing that the Pearls were doing, trying to defend each of their viewpoints as people who have known different versions of Pink Diamond. The reason that they're both defensive about their viewpoints of who they were is because they're Pearls. It's what they were designed to do, and it traps them in that mindset that they frequently fall back into, trapping them in a shell of who they were. And they then fuse to break out of it, and as it gets explained on the beach, they're finally able to understand one another by getting the full story of who she was. They've each taken steps towards being better by knowing that they have each other to help.
We could have had another scene like that one in Rose's scabbard. There's an exchange in the clam that would have been so good if it was longer and quieter, but the fucking showrunner is a fucking chipmunk with a sugar high.
Early seasons were pretty good at this, like when Connie asked Pearl to teach her to fight, and Pearl taught her to be a meat shield, because that's basically how she understands being a soldier. That's interesting. It shows how her relationship with Pink has affected her thought processes everywhere.
But almost every instance after that, it just reminds you, oh hey, Pearl's crush is dead. Pearl's not over it. I'll remind you again in an hour.
What else do you want me to say? I talked about how both Mr. Greg and Volleyball do more than just have Pearl go, oh, Pearl's girlfriend is dead, oh wow. I already talked about how Lily missed the visual storytelling here. I already talked about how she doesn't understand the point of musical numbers, and how they can work not just for expressing plot points, but for emotional outbursts. Maybe I'll have anything to say about it later, but not now.
Pearl's grief and how she deals with it and how it affects her day-to-day thinking is interesting. But you know what else would be interesting? Seeing what Pearl gets up to when she's not being reminded about how she got cucked by the lead guitarist of a Foghat cover band. Like, I don't know, an episode where she warps to Brazil and learns capoeira and takes part in a competition and has sapphic tension with her opponent in the finals. I mean, you like anime so much, do a sapphic tournament arc, that'd be fun.
As much as I loathe the notion of critiquing an episode by wishing it was a different episode entirely, if this were a solo Pearl episode, it'd be great.
Wait, hold on a second, I think I lost my place. Where was I? Oh, Replay just left that clip here about Lily not wanting to critique an episode by suggesting to make it another episode. Now where were we? Oh yeah, Lily suggesting that they write a different episode. Also, this whole thing is going into Pearl's psyche. Not another part of her trauma like you talk about dissecting, but her psyche.
I'm not asking for her to get over it, I'm asking to see her make some progress, because that's satisfying. I want to get to the next episode where it's time to open the grief box again and think, you know what? She's been doing pretty good for herself, I'm proud of her. It's not enough to just tell me what happened off screen, let's see it.
I'm kind of reminded about Legend of Korra just kind of glossed over Korra learning the 4 elements on the basis that the previous show was already about that. But the point that it misses entirely is that the adventure to learn about the 4 elements isn't just about learning the elements. It's about the Avatar broadening her horizons and meeting people from diverse backgrounds and learning to really appreciate every culture on the planet, not holing up in a compound completely isolated from other people and perspectives.
Okay, let's ignore that we do see Pearl getting better in episodes like Business Casual, and heck, even something like Last One Out of Beach City, as we covered. There's a few things to talk about. The first one is that there's an actual reason as to why Korra skipped through learning about the elements, whether people like it or not. The fact that Ozai was able to get so much power pushed the White Lotus into making sure that the Avatar was ready for battle, as Aang's lack of mastery was his biggest weakness when dealing with a bunch of different threats. This is why Korra's journey is about personal connections, while Aang does the opposite. Also, why did we get into this Avatar tangent? Second off, she's doing it again, mentioning how the fandom feels about certain issues rather than just actual criticism of something. Not to say that how a majority of people feels about something is a negative trait that can't be looked into, but it shouldn't be a deciding factor in your own critical analysis.
The interesting part of a story is seeing how characters grow as people. You shouldn't just skip over that and jump right to the end. Oh, but Lily, you still get it, so that means it's good the way it is. Oh, by that logic, why even bother animating it? Just tweet your outline and then make a Tumblr blog where you talk about your OCs and never write anything. The execution of a story is the fun part.
Wait a second, did I miss something here? Did they somehow tweet something out about the show instead of executing it? Is there evidence? Who am I? Why am I here? Why don't I have any legs?
Getting off Pearl for a second and getting onto Pink Diamond, I always found it a little skeezy the way the show spends so much time analyzing every single bad thing Pink Diamond ever did, because Pink Diamond's crimes are fucking minuscule compared to the rest of the Diamonds.
You get these big, elaborate musical numbers about every horrible thing Pink Diamond ever did, like all 2 of them, and it's such a point of drama and weight for like half the show, but then the actual tyrannical oppressors show up and they're basically just silly little aunts.
You see here, she's doing the same thing I talked about earlier, where she talks about how fans analyze every bad thing she does, and then talks about how the show does that thing, but I went through all the songs of Steven Universe to see how many elaborate music numbers there are talking about the bad things that Pink Diamond has done. And from what I gathered, there's Let's Only Think About Love and Drifting Away. And really, I wonder what those 2 songs have in common. If you guessed that they were songs about how they were personally affected by Rose's actions, then congratulations, you're prepared for my next point. The reason why Pink gets more focused than Blue, Yellow, or White is because a lot of the characters have personal ties to Pink Diamond, whether it's through knowing her as Rose Quartz, the leader of the rebellion, and the one who betrayed her diamonds to do so, and Steven's mom, or Pink Diamond, Benel's best friend, where we get more scenes with her and overall more narrative weight, especially since the actions of the other diamonds are thousands of years away from where most of the gems are right now, and the contact that characters have with the diamonds is very limited because, spoilers, nobody really likes them that much due to everything they've done and their attitudes in regards to their life on Earth.
One more thing. I seem to remember Lily designating a giant section of a video to dissect everything bad that Pink Diamond does when the other diamonds are far worse.
What actually happened was that Pink Diamond started the war and pulled the strings on both sides of it like Emperor fucking Palpatine before deciding to fake her own death and live as Rose Quartz forever so she can be free of her responsibilities as a diamond and have an exciting fresh start with Pearl. You know, the plot of Kingdom Hearts is less needlessly complicated than this.
Bit of an interesting conclusion.
To say Becky's priorities are out of whack would be an understatement to end all understatements, but on reflection, I noticed this in other places too.
One of the themes of the show is that none of the gems are perfect parents, but Steven still forgives them because he loves them, right? Well, when you look at the number of times the gems mess up, a trend pops up. Pearl and Amethyst mess up their parenting and traumatize Steven the most, while Garnet, Ruby, and Sapphire mess up like twice. However, the 2 times Garnet messes up are also one of the few times in the show Steven responds with anger at the way he's being treated. When Garnet accidentally scares Steven by teaching him what future vision is, he gets angry even though he was the one that doubled down. When Ruby and Sapphire act a mess in public, Steven yells at them. When Pearl almost lets Steven fall to his death, when Pearl brainwashes Connie to be Steven's warrior slave, when Pearl almost gets herself and Steven killed by flying in a DIY spaceship, when Pearl invades Garnet's boundaries,
When Pearl does anything, Steven starts jumping to hugging it out. It's pretty fucked up.
Wow. Everything Lily just said was a lie. Steven was yelling at Pearl in Sworn to the Sword because Pearl's methodologies invalidated Connie's life and made Steven worth more when he wants them to be equal. And of Rose's scabbard, he yells at Pearl to stop, and then after recognizing how upset she is, he calms down. He does so in Space Race, yelling at her to bail from the rocket while being able to realize why she's doing what she's doing. And in Cry for Help, he yells at Pearl to confess to forcing Garnet to fuse with her, and the only one in which they actually hug it out is in Space Race, as they're trying not to die. And if you do want Steven to hug and actually make up when it comes to Garnet, he also does that in Future Vision.
Now, the Watsonian critique could suggest that Steven is just accustomed to Pearl being nuttier than rat crap at a pistachio factory, while Garnet can usually be counted on to be the actual adult in the room. But the real critique is another one of priorities. The writers are determined to get you to sympathize with Pearl, and so when she fucks up, it's usually excused or swept under the rug.
Swept under the rug? Going through the episodes that I have, none of it really gets swept under the rug. Or at least it isn't as serious as you warned it out to be. In Rose's scabbard, as soon as she sees Steven in danger from trying to reach her, she yells at Steven in shock and surprise, and looks over to make sure that he doesn't die. In Sword to the Sword, after realizing the behavior that she does, she stops doing what she does and vows to improve when it comes to her training Connie, which she kept up with. Heck, the entire Sardonyx arc purposely makes sure that nothing that she does gets swept under the rug. Garnet purposely calls out Pearl for her behaviors, how hurtful they are, and that there's no excuse for what she did. We'll definitely get more into that later though.
I don't think you need to do that, though. A character can be sympathetic and still held accountable for their actions. You're not gonna tarnish Pearl in the eyes of the fanbase if Garnet or Greg have to give her an earful every once in a while.
Lily, this is a bit too easy. Garnet, as we covered before, has yelled at Pearl, especially through the Sardonyx arc. And if we're counting Space Race, then so does Greg. This seems like a weird point. In fact, this entire part seems weird. Like, giving the impression that the show gives favoritism to Pearl exclusively, it's very confusing.
Or you might, the fanbase has rocks for brains after all.
Okay, just calm down, Climber.
But why is she bringing up the zombie drama here? I thought we got past the point of blaming fandoms for the most extreme examples.
Don't worry, we got it all under control. You got a big chunk of the video left, so just breathe in and out.
Okay, I'm good. But I guess if I can, where the heck did this come from? Like, why did you do this pot shot at all? This 9-year-old pot shot, mind you. Not only is it incredibly distasteful, to where Zombie herself says not to blame the show or the fanbase for her mental state during that time, but it's also eerily familiar.
For instance, take this depiction of Steven and his parents. Not bad. The girl's got talent. Notice any differences though? Tumblr sure as fuck did, and they went hog wild on this girl, hounding her for her fat phobia and all of her other not-so-internalized phobias and isms. Now, all of this hounding allegedly led up to a suicide attempt by Zammy, and the hounding didn't let up even as she was recovering in a hospital.
Being responsible for at least 2 separate occasions when they harassed other fans of the show to the point they tried to commit suicide, and that's not English harassment even when it became apparent that these people tried to kill themselves. One of them owned a faction to one of the show's many morbidly obese characters as actually attractive.
The crew seems very afraid of criticizing Pearl at all, and so they do everything in their power to blunt all of her actions, and that usually means Steven forgiving her. Steven is the show's moral center, and if he approves of something, the fanbase usually will too.
Man, why is it that people who clearly haven't seen the show always make this point? And why is Lily making this point? I get that this is from the fandom and not from her, but we've been through this before with the filler argument. In any case, like we covered in the We Are Not Alive, formerly Dire Gentleman video, the Just Stop video, and the previous Lily Orchard videos, Steven is often framed as the moral center, as in the mouthpiece of the creators, when in actuality, he's a character that goes through similar arcs, like with other gems. While he used to use his naive optimism as a positive feature when dealing with problems like the crystal gems, corrupted gems, the cluster, and making new gem friends, we see all of this change with Bismuth, Bismuth, and we see a bunch of instances where he develops as a character, from Bismuth where scars are too deep to see eye to eye with her, to Jasper whose pride makes her refuse to be helped by him, to seeing status above all else like with Eyeball, and a bunch more situations like that, especially when his views get shifted from when he learns that Rose shattered Pink Diamond. While we know the reason as to why this is now, the reveal at the time fundamentally changed what it meant to be a crystal gem, and more specifically who his mom was, the person he was trying everything to be like because so many people looked up to her. His entire viewpoint changes, even in other aspects, in different parts of the story, like with Full Disclosure and I Am My Mother, episodes in which his emotional core clouds his judgment and makes him think in different ways than he normally would, and yet still retaining the enthusiasm and energy to help others. And the fact that so many people try to pin him as the true moral center just means that either you don't see Steven as a character in his own show, or you watched Bismuth and heard about what happened to the Diamonds and thought that you knew the whole show, just like that. But Lily should be neither at this point.
In fact, it's a common deflection tactic of the Diamond's redemption arc, because people will say, oh, they weren't redeemed because Steven hasn't forgiven them? Which always struck me as a strange argument, because Steven isn't one of their victims. It's not up to him.
I'm sorry, what? Let's ignore the redemption stuff. We'll go into that in a bit maybe, but the implication that Steven is not the victim of the Diamonds, while yes, he fights gems that have been affected by stuff that he isn't, like corruption, his planet is constantly in danger thanks to the cluster, the consistent threats to the Earth, hell, the Diamonds coming to the Earth to finish the job.
Look, just stop taking shortcuts. Unpack Pearl's behavior. People will get it.
If we want to talk about taking shortcuts, then we could talk about how Lily addresses Pearl's behavior. She spends time either complaining that it's ripping off Utena, ignoring the significance of visual storytelling and musical numbers when it doesn't fit her narrative, or just saying that it's rushed through. To be more blunt, she spent this time going over Pearl in depth in 3, arguably 4 episodes. Last one out of Beat City, Rose's Scabbard, Volleyball, and technically Mr. Greg.
It's almost like there's this fear people will condemn Pearl at the first opportunity, but people don't usually do that unless they're bigoted or it's immediately clear that this character is your baby. And look, I've got no stones to throw in this regard. I'm a writer myself. I have characters for whom I go, that's my baby, they have never done anything wrong in their life. But you don't have to be afraid of people not being on board with it.
Here's a dirty secret that I've known for years. People will get on board with any idea if you tell a good story and tell it well. If it takes you a while, people are fine with that. You don't have to preemptively try and counter internet grumbling. Let them grumble.
Now wait a second there. I feel like all of this is a bit too much to drop on someone, especially your viewers. There's a few questions I have. Where has the show done this? Not where you feel it happened, like you feel that Pearl has been through this, but like, do you have facts behind it? And also, there's the elephant in the room. There's definitive evidence that this isn't the case, as you had the exact same problem with Bismuth in both your original video.
Everyone and their grandmother was tearing this episode apart for the fucked up lol so neutral hack of a theme, and the crew just let it happen. Sugar's insistence on giving the audience as little information as possible backfired in the most spectacular way, and was long considered a huge black mark on the series. A lot of people forgave it after the Pink Diamond reveal and Bismuth was unbubbled for the wedding, but it shouldn't have taken this long to get here.
And your updated Bismuth rant.
This is difficult to talk about. Not because it's a complicated issue, mind. It's not. Steven Universe makes the claim that killing a tyrant makes you as bad as them. It doesn't. That statement is just wrong no matter how you spin it. Objectively, morally, pragmatically, it is wrong. Steven is wrong. Rebecca Sugar is wrong. Anyone who has ever said this in regards to works of fiction and real life is wrong.
At least, according to Climber, it looks like a volcano about to explode.
There's always the risk that after a bad episode, your Twitter mentions are going to be flooded, but honestly, I think showrunners should just not have Twitter anyway. That's just bad for you.
I don't know what to say here. Is this relevant?
Well, there is one way to find out.
What?
Now, this one is also another friend of mine. Her name is Name Redacted. She can help us find some possible connections. Let's see.
3 possible options. Option 1. Lily believes that the act of creating Steven Universe is done while the creator receives active feedback from places like Twitter, similarly to how Starversus was seen as doing.
Well, aside from the blatant facts of this being wrong, as seen with how the show finished production in 2016, around the time that Bismuth aired, there's not really any evidence for that connection.
Option 2. She could be giving this as general advice to her fanbase of people who want to create art.
While that does seem nice, it doesn't really apply to Steven Universe.
Option 3. She is referring to her previous comments about how the crew is overcompensating by shoving whatever they could for a character to seem sympathetic or redeemable.
And your solution is to just not engage with criticism of what you do and develop? Not only does that not help in terms of improvement to Steven Universe, especially due to the time thing in part 1, but it's also very unproductive advice that doesn't really help anyone.
More information came out and I was like, yeah, alright, I'm on board. However, I do think Pearl's story, and indeed many character stories, take way too long to get to the fucking point. You don't need this much setup, you don't need this much filler, you don't need any filler.
Here's a dirty secret that I've known for years. People will get on board with any idea if you tell a good story and tell it well. If it takes you a while, people are fine with that. You don't have to preemptively try and counter internet grumbling. Let them grumble.
Huh, I see. Here we have people not being fine with that, but let's get it clear. Lily, after saying that people are fine to wait for a story even if it takes a while, complains about a story taking a while specifically because it takes a while. It's also sort of contradictory when you say that it takes too long to get to the point, yet you already believe that you know the point, as do lots of people, so which one is it? Even if both of these things end up being true at the same time, in the sense that a plot is predictable but it takes too long to get to that predictable plot, A, considering the shallow analysis you presented so far, it's essentially on the level of predicting the crystal gems are gemstones. It's too vague to be meaningful. And B, you could argue that it's how Pearl is able to handle it where the episode's conflict comes in.
Pearl's grief and how she deals with it and how it affects her day-to-day thinking is interesting. But you know what else would be interesting? Seeing what Pearl gets up to when she's not being reminded about how she got cucked by the lead guitarist of a Foghat cover band. Like, I don't know, an episode where she warps to Brazil and learns capoeira and takes part in a competition and has sapphic tension with her opponent in the finals. I mean, you like anime so much, do a sapphic tournament arc, that'd be fun.
And yet, you want more stuff like this, huh? Something that can be defined as filler? Well, let's hold on and keep that in mind as we learn about how Lily defines what filler is in a little bit.
I have no idea why so many Beach City episodes are in the... Actually, no, that's a lie, I do know.
I hope you guys are ready.
See, back in the 80s and 90s, most action-adventure anime were made as adaptations of comic books, but for some boneheadedly stupid reason, the decision to adapt a comic into an anime was made exactly 0.4 seconds after the first issue hit shelves. So a lot of these shows end up catching up to the comic book and needing to fill time with filler seasons while the writer made more story to adapt. The thing is, Japanese comic books are usually written and drawn by one guy, and so for the longer, more elaborate shows, those filler arcs were getting pretty common.
Now, the reason they're called filler is because nothing happens. Any character development is forgotten when they get back to the real story, and nothing in them has any weight. This is what filler actually means. It is a nothing burger plot to stall for time.
So, for instance, if Pearl went to Brazil and they never mention it again despite going into her trauma, wouldn't that be filler? Or, hypothetically, if we focus on Sadie's band, considering that they are, indeed, characters important to the show, as they are important to Steven, would that not be filler by your own definition?
I don't know why fandom got it into their head that filler means character episodes that don't advance the plot, but that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life.
Well, for what you're talking about, there's a few things already. While you do indeed talk about the history of filler, and hell, some of it isn't too far off the ball, this comment here kinda ignores how words could change meaning over time. As of now, the term filler is used more so for episodes or parts that don't have to do with an overarching plot. Filler absolutely is the chance to develop characters more. As an example, Sanji in the G8 arc shows how much of his backstory influences his way of thinking when it comes to wasting food. And while it is a character episode, it doesn't alter relations between characters in a significant plot way. And as something to break your previous definition, there's a lot of episodes in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure that, while still made in the manga and are not made by the anime themselves, are filler, yet they develop the characters in multiple ways as well, seeing different sides to them. Heck, the very example that you used proves it, as Blue Order's tally was specifically in regards to the overarching story in Starverses, and immediately after he tallies them, he talks about how they still have great character moments, and saying that they indeed have to do with the charm of the show by letting us see these characters as characters.
Seeing the point of view switch between Ludo and Star really solidified that this season and its story was important. I remember thinking throughout season 1 that I like how everything sticks like that, but one of the best displays of continuity, and it's one of the things that I liked most about this show, is seeing how Star grew as a person.
As if the concept of filler in fandom spaces doesn't actually mean what you want it to mean.
Now, the thing about this business model is that it was the worst fucking business model anyone has ever thought of since trickle-down economics. If there was ever a distillation of the worst of dystopian nightmare capitalism, it would be the anime and manga industry. Crunch is rampant, animators are underpaid, comic writers even more so, and a few companies are exploiting people en masse.
Anime filler arcs are not a cute, funny thing. They are an exact symptom of what happens when one person can't create infinitely, but the money men demand constant profit.
And then it all came crashing down. If you guys are paying attention here, Lily does not connect the crunch of mangaka and filler arcs. It seems like she did, but there's a lot in her tangent that she just ends up missing. First off, filler isn't connected to crunch meaningfully, in the sense that there are some shows that are crunch with a lot of unpaid staff and mass exploitation that doesn't have filler. A notable example is Jujutsu Kaisen, which abuses its animators and voice actors severely. Second off, from what you described with your history, filler would be an anime problem, but there are manga out there with filler in them that ends up being transcribed into the anime, with Naruto, and as previously mentioned, JoJo. Heck, sometimes the filler is just part of an anime's production and not tied into a manga adaptation, like with Cowboy Bebop. And as a result of this all, it ends up being a failed ethical and moral argument against filler. But what does this have to do with Steven Universe?
Weebs have a hard time accepting any criticism of the anime industry. It's so emotionally devastating to them, they've been trying to spin it into xenophobia for the last 15 years.
I don't know where the heck this came from, but are we just doing the thing where we just make a claim about an entire fandom and just having to believe you because you haven't personally seen it? As a thought experiment, I want you, at home, to imagine a fandom of a franchise that has a lot of darkness behind the scenes, yet nobody within the fandom will ever criticize the darkness behind the scenes. If you think you found one, type in something like the problems with blank fandom, or problems with the blank industry, and tell me that none of those videos exist, or go to Twitter, Tumblr, or forum sites like Reddit. For this particular one, there are more than a few videos that pop up detailing criticisms of the anime industry.
So Steven Universe, a show made by Weebs, didn't really think anything of filling the story with filler episodes that do nothing.
Now, this couldn't have anything to do with how it airs on Cartoon Network, airing in such a way in which a fully serialized format would be ineffective for replay value for CN, as a result of it being hard to be able to get back into the story for most viewers, resulting in a lot of story-based shows being a bit more episodic in nature to pull people in with regular airing, like with Avatar, Adventure Time, and Danny Phantom. No, it's just because they're weebs. Yeah, okay, hold on, I'm taking a step back.
While it's clear that you, tried your best, you're assuming that people behind Steven Universe are these uncritical anime fans who believe that there's no problem with filler, and those claims are very, very hard to substantiate, and it's rather illogical. I mean, it's safe to assume that they're anime fans, but to say that they're uncritical as a result is like saying that you're uncritical of Pokemon, and we both know that that's not true. And then there's the fact that, while it is an explanation, saying that because the writers are weeb they put in filler is unprovable. Just about as unprovable as your claim that they're uncritical weebs in the first place. You don't have to put in something from what you like just because you like something after all.
Lily just tried to connect Steven Universe episodes airing to the abusive crunch of the anime industry. What is wrong with her?
Actually, Lily, Rebecca said that every episode is important, and there is no filler. I'm sure she believes that. But then you get something like Steven and the Stevens, which is supposed to explain how time travel works, but then they never use time travel again. All of this waffling has real effects. The last arc of the show before it was cancelled was cut horrendously short, and it didn't need to be if they had just gotten to it a lot quicker. See, Cartoon Network wanted Ruby and Sapphire's wedding to be the last episode of the show, and for a show all about love and finding happiness and purpose in life, that's actually a really cool idea. It wouldn't fix the sidelining Ruby, Sapphire, and Garnet all had throughout the show, but it'd be a pretty neat denouement. Allegedly, and I say allegedly because I honestly just don't believe a single word that comes out of Becky's mouth, she had to really fight to get a few more episodes to finish the story. But the solution there could have just been to flip them around. Have the wedding after the end of the show, after all that shit with the diamonds.
Okay, one by one here. The unfortunate problem with that first statement is that if you believe that filler represents nothing burgers that don't affect the characters, then Steven and the Stevens wouldn't be filler, as the events of that episode do end up affecting Steven. You know, staying true to himself by watching himself die and all that. The second one is one that we'll get into more in a bit, but it wasn't the fact that it has so many episodes. It was the fact that they wanted some of those episodes to do the wedding in the first place that led to the last arc of the show being cut short. But then again, none of that matters because you don't trust Rebecca Sugar. Why? I don't know. There's no substantiation as to why you don't trust her word when it comes to this, other than the fact that you don't trust her. It's so closed off to any viewpoint that isn't your own that it just becomes, surprise surprise, bad faith argumentation.
These negotiations presumably took place in 2018. It was possible. And if you did it well, it'd be beautiful because you're having the wedding after healing the crystal gems. That would be storytelling. But by the time you came around to figure most of this stuff out, the show had already backed itself into a corner by clogging itself with way too many episodes about Mayor Dewey, Lars, Sadie, and Ronaldo. And at the end of the day, any show has to end at some point. Cartoon Network was never going to let the show keep limping along forever, and that's not even a problem unique to Steven Universe.
Multiple shows have hamstrung themselves by just twiddling their thumbs with a looming deadline on the horizon.
Are we still doing the thing where we try to interpret how the scheduling and stuff was done for the show, okay then. I'm glad that the argument that you make is CN has a right to talk about how much it wants the show to continue, and expresses no plans to cancel it, and then gutting it in production to where they just decide, whoops, can't do that, when they got a wedding episode, or just need a tax write-off.
There's a fallacy called retrospective determinism, which is what Lily is using right now. It essentially means using hindsight bias, saying that because something happened, no matter how unpredictable it was therefore inevitable. As an example, let's say you see someone eating a fish. After eating the fish, they feel sick and then their arms turn into eels. Seeing that and saying, well, that's what happens when you ate the fish, is an example of that. Another one is having a show be unexpectedly cancelled and saying that it was looming, the definition of which is seemingly about to happen, and regarded as ominous or worrying, which either must mean that Lily is using this fallacy, or she has the gift of prophecy to say this about both Steven Universe and the Owl House, both of which had the fact that they were ending announced partway through their development, to the point where they couldn't see it coming. Not to mention shows like OKKO, Mau Mau, Infinity Train, and so on.
And heck, even if they could see it coming, I will say that theoretically, making it so that the wedding comes at the end would have worked, but on the other hand, this ending, besides how rushed it was, makes sense as is, ending an arc for Garnet and doing so to be the perfect transition to Steven's arc.
Even good cartoons get 3 or 4 seasons at most. Look, I'm sorry, but you're not One Piece.
You're not going to get 500 episodes to start the process, to begin the preliminary evaluation, to decide if you're eligible for permission to embark on the first leg of your journey.
Wow, another mention of anime, and it's One Piece that you're comparing to Steven Universe. Okay then, sure.
And Steven Universe was already long as sin. It had 180 episodes. You know how many episodes All in the Family had? 205. And that's the most beloved sitcom in the fucking world. Revolutionary Girl Utena, the show Becky cradled most of her ideas from, had 40 episodes, and it managed to tell a it managed to tell a complete story. It managed to actually end in a way that was satisfying. It actually managed to end.
Episodes in Steven Universe are more like 11 minutes. That's like half of what shows usually are. Isn't it more like 90 episodes?
Well, Bonnie, congratulations on figuring out your division.
Thank you.
And to answer your question, every episode still has a complete 3-act structure, so their runtime is irrelevant.
Oh, I see. Carry on.
There we go.
You know what doesn't have that complete 3-act structure? Most episodes of One Piece. Heck, most anime. This is why your comparison totally fails, by the way.
Lack of focus is the show's big problem. Wherever the crew is writing a story, they're getting distracted with random vignettes
that each develop the characters by spending more time with them and learning how they act in certain scenarios.
Anime references,
which the only 2 references to were in Utena and anime/manga crunch culture.
And trying to cram Becky's latest musical number into it somewhere like a Monty Oum fight,
which had intended meanings that Lily just doesn't get.
It's clear, on an executive level at least, that one or both of the showrunners saw this as their magnum opus and thus needed to cram everything into it they possibly could.
You know, I don't feel like... Wait, both?
I'm assuming this is an error on her part, right?
It better be.
Any idea they might have had that could serve as its own single-season spin-off or miniseries was just thrown into Steven Universe as an aside.
They had so many ideas for Peridot, and they were like, let's do all of them. I would have loved to see that kind of passion, dedication, and care given to the entire main cast.
Weird how it isn't a problem there, but it is here.
Most of the criticism towards Steven Universe often gets deflected by blaming Cartoon Network, and I think that belies the real issue. On some level, Becky was convinced this was the only chance she would get, despite having worked in the industry for some time, even working with superstar producers like Gendy Tartakovsky. So not only was every idea shoved in there, everything was compromised to such an absurd degree. Ironically, it was Steven Universe that gave me a brand new appreciation for Lauren Faust, who for a while became rather notorious for bailing on projects after creative differences with the executives. And I respect that. I respect just going, you don't want me to make the show I wanted to make, then I won't make the show.
But honestly, I don't think creative freedom would have solved anything, because just on a fundamental level, the way she writes and thinks is flawed.
If CN gave her the chance to make more episodes, then Rebecca would not make it so rushed, because she would have the time to actually make it. This main issue is the fact that the Diamond arc had a rushed conclusion, and in that case, it was exclusively a result of the executives. I'd also like to point out that this part is suspiciously similar to Blue Order's words when talking about Star Versus.
This was Darren Nefsey's first show. Most writers' first shows don't even get this far. She had a show that had the potential of going down as something amazing. but in the end, they dropped the ball.
But it applies less considering that, like you said, she's worked in the industry before, and still works till now, as well as the fact that Lily has shown no evidence that proves any of this.
The answer to any lore question about Steven Universe is it depends. Why? Because the answer changes every week. Are fusions composite identities, or are they their own identities greater than the sum of their parts? It depends. They are one where they need to be, and the other at all other times, and there is no consistency.
I mean, what if they're both? As Garnet says, they are an experience. The experience can express itself as a person and as a group of people with a common relationship.
Is fusion a metaphor for relationships, intimacy, sex, friendship, symbiosis, combat team-ups, the concept that mashing characters together is cool, tax evasion? The answer is yes.
Did I mention that there's lesbian sex in this show? Wait, I'm sorry. It's called fusion.
Let's not beat around the bush. The Steven Universe crew are a bunch of left-wing radicals. Fusion is a metaphor for sex, as the show's own creator admitted.
Alright, Climber, calm down. Take a moment to think of just flexibility, love, and trust.
Okay. I'm calm. Nice reference, though.
It seems like something you'd get.
Anyways, this backsliding is incredible. Like, oh my goodness. This is literally the fusion stuff that ER and Easy Peasy have been saying. I honestly thought we were past this stuff, as literally everyone else gets the concept of fusion, and presenting this stuff is that of someone who somehow knows less about the show than she did with her 2-hour video. To talk about it again, fusion means relationships, and there are many kinds of relationships that exist, like the types that exist for concept team-ups, the same way that two people can work collaboratively on something, and the types that exist just because they wanna, the same way that two people can just decide to spend their lives with one another. It's the reason why Sardonyx acts differently from the Topaz fusion, or how they end up acting differently than Malachite.
Now, fusion as a concept is not unique. It was found in anime for years, and the style that Steven Universe uses is taken from both Dragon Ball Z and Kingdom Hearts.
Huh. Kingdom Hearts again. The funny thing is that I can't find anything that says that she was inspired by Kingdom Hearts. I feel like this is projection.
But in those, it's not really emblematic of anything other than the power of friendship taken to its logical extreme. In Steven Universe, because Becky's kind of pretentious, fusion is well, it's not a metaphor, it's a simile. A metaphor is something, a simile is like something. It's basically unity and working in sync.
I'm a bit confused. While yes, you get the definitions of similes and metaphors right, I'm not sure about how this refers to the literary importance that you got from your second definitions. That being that metaphors are core to a story's themes, while similes draw inspiration from them, and aren't part of the central theme. The biggest example to the contrary is Forrest Gump, with the iconic quote, "Mama always told me life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get." Also, saying that it's like unity is accurate, but missing a lot of details, unfortunately.
There's a lot of ways to do that, and admittedly, despite insistence from the fandom otherwise, the show has never really pretended that isn't the case. You've got the very intimate kind of fusion with Garnet, but then you have Steven and Amethyst bro-fisting to fight bad guys. Any idea that it's strictly about intimacy or relationships is thrown out the window when Jasper fuses with a complete stranger and a beast.
Actually, all these examples show intimacy and relationships with one another. Garnet is Ruby and Sapphire, just liking being together. That's their intimacy and relationship. Smoky Quartz is the result of Steven and Amethyst reconciling after they realize they're not gonna be alone when it comes to fighting tough enemies. That they're both the odd gems out, how they use that oddness to their advantage, and how they can ask one another for help. It's why Smoky Quartz has the weapon that she has, and shows the relationship between the two. Corrupted Jasper is the result of both of the gems being desperate, with Jasper being desperate to beat the fusion, and the corrupted gem being desperate enough to leave, and being able to focus on the desperation by fusing, with the power to defeat the gems, and the power to be free by forming outside the cage. They all have some form of relationship with one another, whether it's being together, being misfits together, or just being desperate together.
Fusions are presumed to not last if the people involved aren't in sync, but Lapis kept Jasper at the bottom of the ocean for months, tormenting her for giggles.
First off, I guess her opinions on Lapis didn't change. Good. I'm glad. Second off, they can also come apart if they're destabilized or take a lot of damage, like what happened with Garnet at the end of Season 1, or Malachite, or Corrupt Jasper. Third off, this section ignores the similarities that Lapis and Jasper have with one another to even get that fusion in the first place, specifically the power of control. In this part of the story, neither of them have control of their situations, whether it's being the crystal gems, or keeping those that she cares about safe. Lapis stayed in the fusion to keep them all safe, while Jasper stayed because she knew that she could beat the crystal gems at any time with the power that she had. Remember, if Lapis could have disengaged at any time instead of Torment for shits and giggles, then so could Jasper, yet her pride as a warrior losing to a fusion didn't make that a possibility.
Then in the very last episode, Steven is just fusing with gems that aren't even active. Which honestly, are you allowed to do that? That feels like it should be a crime.
Are you tracking that?
Sure am.
Okay, good. I guess we'll talk about Lily poisoning the well, as, you know, Steven did that to wake them up using his powers, after realizing he was able to do it with Amethyst. Also, are you gonna ignore the inter-character relationships that Steven and the Crystal Gems had, the same way you ignored it in Spooky Quartz?
Any notion of fusion having some kind of meaning is abandoned by the writers pretty damn fast. But you know what? That's fine, because that was a problem that they already solved. Fusion is given its intimate weight through permafusion. Garnet and later Rhodonite are permanently fused because they are in love. Because of this, they're actually very in sync because they're accustomed to being fused all the time, and they don't like not being fused because they've been together so long that being apart creates a very deafening solitude.
Oh my god, not more cherry picking. If you want to talk about specifically intimacy, then Garnet is probably your best case for that, but you could also argue that a lot of weight is also put on it with fusions like Stevani, in which their intimate connection is focused on while not being a permafusion, specifically how they feel together, how they love and treat one another in this state, so on and so forth. In essence, I'm trying to get that fusion has more intimate weight than just permafusion, but I've already gone on about that, so I'll just skip the part where she does praise a lot of what Garnet does, only to immediately shit on the stuff that Steven Universe does.
This is usually the part where I tell you how they fuck it up, but no, this is one of the few things they remain consistent on. They remain so consistent on it, in fact, that they actually use it to interesting effect. See, because Garnet is the only adult in Steven's life who isn't fucking crazy, she becomes his model for good relationships, which means Steven, ever determined to take the shortest route to any destination possible, proposes to Connie and says that they should be Stevani permanently.
This is disturbing to Connie, who has lived with actual real parents and friends, and so places a lot of value on individuality, so she obviously turns him down. They're also children, so legally they can't marry, and morally they shouldn't.
Huh, I guess it's not as immediate. Also, wow, he tries to take the shortest route to any solution possible? But before I tell you to keep this in mind, what's with that children remark? Like, yeah, that's sort of the point, that Steven trying to permafuse with Connie would be wrong. It's not like it's the worst statement ever, it's just a bit confusing.
Aren't you forgetting something?
Oh, yeah, keep this in mind for later.
It shows, probably for the first time, that other people have experiences that are different from Steven, and the things he's been taught to value are not the things they've been taught to value. Future is the only time Steven's role as moral center of the show is scrubbed away, and he has to confront the fact that people will say no to him, and he's just gonna have to live with that. There's also a PTSD plot, but it sucks.
If we talk about people overall, there is an episode earlier in Future that addresses that factor, but more to the point, there's a bunch of episodes that show off this stuff specifically, the Townie episodes. While some of them, like Lars and the Cool Kids and Kiki's Pizza Delivery Service, do focus on Steven's morals being more right, there are episodes like Frybo, Shirt Club, Political Power, and Deadbeat Dad, where the characters learn lessons that don't revolve around Steven, and this is even excluding things that happen to gems like Jasper, Eyeball, and even Lapis, where he also had to deal with gems who say no to him, and have him ending up trying to live with that. Also, screw me for giving the benefit of the doubt on this one. Now we have confirmation that Steven is the moral center as seen by Lily. Like I said before, why would Lily be making this argument? Steven is not the moral center. To believe that anyone is the moral center would be removing the complexity of any of these characters, as they point to a definitive right and wrong, according to the writers. And Steven Universe doesn't do that, at least in a long-term sense. Especially because of how Steven learns things and develops throughout the show, from all that he's learned in season 1, to how he learns things to help people in season 2, to Bismuth and learning everything about his mom in season 3, and beyond, so on and so forth. If you want a fantastic example of him being challenged by it, then look no further than, and I can't believe I'm saying this, Steven and Connie's breakup arc, in which he's been proven time and time again to be wrong about things, and has to deal with that fact from how he's treated Connie to how he couldn't help Peridot when dealing with Lapis. If you want a better example, then remember what she said last time about Steven always taking the shortest route possible? Yeah, it's almost like that doesn't work in every other scenario that I talk about. Finally, man, you're just gonna really drop the PTSD thing on us. us and expect us to react that way to it. There's no argument or anything, just Lily saying it sucks and us moving on. Now, could I go on a tangent explaining why she's super duper wrong? No, because she doesn't elaborate. What's the point of anything? Knowing Lily, she probably did the same thing that she did in her original video, by having her confirmation bias fed by videos critiquing this. So there's no point in responding about why it's actually good. I could, but for the sake of this video's pacing and the fact that there's not much to pick on, I'll just recommend a few videos and then move on.
So yeah, permafusion and the weight and implications behind it are actually really well done, and Crooniverse sticks to it. Unfortunately, that solid foundation turns out to be a cockroach in the coffee maker when we get to the sardonyx arc.
Wait a second. I remember this.
You remember this?
Yeah, I do. It's from the last Lily Orchard video that I ever watched, other than her more recent and controversial ones, that is. At least it's the last one that I watched regularly.
A video? So what you're saying is that she talked about this in a video of hers?
I remember that it was a video in which she misunderstood metaphors. She compares the end of Change Your Mind to Seahorse Seashell Party from Family Guy, in which Meg stays in an abusive relationship for no reward other than the happiness of her abusers. She changed the video's name into Steven Universe's Ideologically Rotten. I remember Lily talking about the Sardonyx arc, but I can't remember what she said about it.
I guess it's the same as her original video, where she takes some points of her previous videos and expands upon them a little bit in the bigger ones.
Yeah, I guess that's it. Still, I feel like I'm missing something. Maybe it'll come back to me, but I don't know.
In the Sardonyx arc, Pearl and Garnet form Sardonyx to destroy Paradox Beacon's homeworld with more grace and agility than Sugilite previously had. But then Pearl starts repairing it to have an excuse to fuse more often. No idea why it didn't occur to her to just ask, but then again, you can set your watch to Pearl being completely fucking irrational. She gets caught, and Garnet is rightly furious, leading to an episode where Ruby and Sapphire can't agree on what to do about it. This is all interesting character work so far, as we now have to contrast the fact that Sapphire uses her precognition to avoid addressing issues in the here and now, and Ruby can't see the future, so she thinks Sapphire doesn't care. When they get home, all Garnet says is, not now.
This is good because it puts the arc to bed in a way where we can pick it back up whenever we like, and deal with it when everyone involved has clearer heads.
What do you mean put the arc to bed? Why would they have put the arc to bed when the modus operandi of the Crystal Gems is to work together and save the day? They need to communicate as a team. And sure, they could have just had an episode where they just sat at the table and Steven tried to do therapy. Sure, that's you recommending that the show is something else instead of an action-adventure cartoon show, but sure. The only problem is that they wouldn't actually do that. They already find human traditions to be stupid and ridiculous, so why would they just decide to turn now and face each other with an emotionally mature outlook? It's almost like the show is about them developing in that way. This is why the collapse is important, because, as stated by the other characters, it gives them some time to talk out their issues.
We could do that, but you remember how Pearl and Pink Pearl had to have a rapid-fire therapy session inside the Mind Break clan, and all it really did was emphasize how averse to quiet moments Crooniverse is? Well, Pearl and Garnet get stuck in a trash compactor and have to very quickly work out their shit and fuse before they can get out. Furthermore, this confrontation is largely Pearl just asking for forgiveness and then making excuses about how she couldn't help herself, which is something
Whoa, what was that?
Oh, that's my friend Asterisk. He's here to help censor out stuff that might be a little unappealing.
What do you mean?
You know, stuff that might be a little bit triggering for the audience.
Oh, I guess that's fine. In any case, though, there's also the fact that Pearl and Garnet being forced together in the shrinking room actually did need to happen, since it got Garnet to stop being stoic and generally closed up, as she usually is, and it got Pearl to stop trying so hard to gain Garnet's approval, which after cry for help, she often does. In doing so, Pearl and Garnet are able to take some time and communicate with one another. Also, this downplays the advice that Garnet gives Pearl, cause like you say, Pearl doesn't really get relationships in the same way that Garnet does.
Pearl wanted to fuse with Garnet because Garnet's so strong and put together and stoic and independent, and she wanted to be strong too. But Garnet says, hey, this idea that I'm some stoic, strong, always together person who doesn't need emotional support is a load of horse shit. This is one of the first times Garnet has admitted to having doubts and insecurities outside of being the stoic one. So, when do we get to see more of this side of her, Becky?
Let's go through this one more time. In Serious Steven, Garnet and Steven work together to solve a labyrinth, and she sees how Steven's ways of thinking are useful to them in their missions. In Arcade Mania, we get to see Garnet being addicted to a video game, in which we see how goal-oriented she is. Then we get to the beginning of her arc in Future Vision, in which Garnet reveals to Steven how she sees so many futures opening up to Garnet. We get the revelation of Garnet's maturity and how she has to learn to be more open and communicative while factoring in the emotions of Steven. In Love Letters, we get something similar, factoring in the emotions of Jamie. and something similar on that topic in Reformed with Amethyst. And keeping it together, we then see Garnet become more vulnerable when it comes to the experiments that Homeworld did on gem shards, and how it horrifies her seeing the shattered corpses of the rebellion fused together. Then, of course, we have the Sardonyx arc, specifically Cry for Help, Keystone Motel, and Friendship, where Garnet expresses how Pearl fusing with her was a terrible thing to do. Because of how it was only done to use her, in Keystone Motel, we learn quite literally that she's fighting herself over it, and that keeping it bottled up was not healthy for her to do, for how it affects everyone else around her, prompting her to express it in the future, which was done in Friendship where she actively communicates this to Pearl. After that, we have Garnet revealing to Steven the beginning of Ruby and Sapphire's romance, a notably vulnerable part of herself in The Answer. Afterwards, we see this vulnerability in Logdate 7152, where she opens up herself to Peridot, and they end up talking with one another. We get to see her vulnerability again when we see Mindful Education, in which we see the vulnerability of Ruby and Sapphire when dealing with uncomfortable thoughts, and how it affects Garnet. In 3 Gems and a Baby, and Your Mother and Mine, we get to see Garnet's backstory, and how her life was before meeting Steven. We can see her being emotionally available and displaying weaknesses in both Steven's dream, in which she feels regret for her mistakes, and how Greg gets taken, and Pool Hopping, where she reveals that she is nervous about not being able to predict Steven, and where she goes mentally. Finally, there's Now We're Only Falling Apart, and the entire marriage arc, in which she expresses how Rose's lies made her question everything that she knew about the rebellion. And after Pearl explains everything, Ruby and Sapphire reconcile by getting together for themselves, being vulnerable and confident in who they are, without the need of Rose to validate them.
It's unfortunately also soured by the fact that Garnet is now consoling the person who assaulted her. Why? Why is she doing this? Why are Pearl's feelings being given more weight than the person she hurt?
Well, unfortunately, this is how a lot of stories treat black women, especially in relation to their white co-leads. Garnet's feelings aren't prioritized because the writers overwhelmingly favor Pearl, and this is a story where Pearl is undeniably, unequivocally in the wrong,
and as we've explored, Crewniverse is just unwilling to stick to that.
So not only do we have the return to the point where she says that Pearl is given special treatment, but she also implies that the writers are racist while making this story.
This point really misses a lot of the context for what actually happens in this scene. First off, the episode itself focuses on Pearl trying to make things right. Pearl sees her own behaviors as harmful and tries her best to save it. Heck, so does Amethyst and Steven in the initial Cry for Help. While you say that Garnet's feelings aren't prioritized, that misses the point of Keystone Motel, where we get a direct reference and prioritization of Garnet's feelings. As a result, this episode is the one where they're forced to communicate with one another, as it gets in the middle of doing their jobs, living their lives, protecting the Earth. Heck, even if we're talking about the scene alone, it's not Pearl's behavior being seen as more important than Garnet's. It's so that Pearl's behaviors can be addressed and worked on, thanks to this push from Garnet. Specifically, the indication that Pearl has this debilitating problem of feeling worthless.
Also due to the fact that the show doesn't really want to explore any kind of conflict resolution other than forgiveness, which naturally puts the responsibility for ending a conflict on the victim over the perpetrator.
Another forgiveness take. Oh boy.
Garnet didn't immediately forgive Pearl. She didn't automatically trust Pearl again. But now that they both have a better understanding of one another, they can, and did, move forward. That's the point of this scene. Not prioritizing one character's feelings over another.
I think this part with Lily is also rather strange. She does just keep talking about forgiveness as a primary theme, just like so many others before her have done. But this also reveals a gigantic problem with Steven Universe criticism overall. So many people see scenes where things start to happen and believe that it actually showcases the final product immediately. With Lapis, there's the fact that Lapis was a bit mean to Peridot, meaning that Lapis was an abuser to Peridot. In Bismuth, Steven says one line about how specifically shattering gems is like what Homeworld does. People jump on it to say that Steven believes that the goals of Bismuth are as cruel and evil as the diamonds with corruption, shard fusion, and so on. The same goes for the diamonds, with everyone believing that the show redeems these authoritarian colonialist dictators at the very end of the show, and the aforementioned Steven's PTSD, which sucked, was believed to have been solved by a hug. Ugh, at least we're halfway through this video.
Well, hold on to my friend Shark.
Okay, why am I holding on to them?
You'll see.
But the problems with that are magnified when your dainty white ballerina violently assaults a black woman and all she has to say for herself is, "I couldn't help it, you're just so strong and alluring."
I violently assault by asking to fuse and then do it? I mean, you could call it manipulation for sure, as the fact that she kept on repairing the tower to have them fuse under the guise that it was Peridot was manipulative, but violently assault is not what happened here. Wait a second. Hey, name redacted, or whatever your name is. Can you read this part out loud for any of the people listening to this and not really watching it?
Yes, I'm treating this as equivalent to sexual assault. Feel free to debate it somewhere that isn't here.
But wait a minute. Isn't this rape. But in spite of this scene, the show is apparently teaching kids the wonders of consent.
Is forced fusion rape? And if it is, did Pearl repeatedly rape Garnet in one of the show's arcs? Proof number 4. Pearl tricking Garnet into fusing and the interaction being an obvious allegory for rape.
Okay. I'm just gonna take over a little bit to say, what are you doing, Lily? What are any of us doing? If we get to this part and see nothing wrong with this, if you see this as analogous to sexual assault, then that's one thing. One very off-the-ball thing that seems a lot separated from Steven Universe as a whole, but that's just one thing. The problem comes with pushing it as something that the showrunners intended, or if it's something that's actually supposed to be perceived as, because...
No, I'm sorry. I'll take this from here. If you look at a show and say that a show is bad because you interpret something with no evidence and just your opinions, you can't use that as criticism. This is it. This is the end result of bad faith criticism. Applying that because you personally don't get what they were doing with Fusion, they put that in a children's show. Now, I've debunked this several times before. Fusion isn't sex. Fusion is representative of relationships, and relationships can come in many different forms, yada yada yada. But this form of logic is like going, I think that the meaning of life is to make babies. That's a stupid meaning for life. Life is gross. Everyone who participates in life is gross. It's an incredibly close-minded sentiment, and a shocking one that I thought we'd only see from bad faith right-wingers like ER and Easy Peasy.
It's not good enough to have characters of color in your show if you're going to so thoroughly torment them like this. And that's what happened to Garnet.
You know what I've been wondering this whole time? Where's Amethyst in this discussion? Heck, where's Steven in all this? If you want to talk about Garnet being a black woman in relation to her white co-leads, then we could talk about Garnet and Steven in episodes like Keeping It Together and Pool Hopping, in which Garnet's feelings are being put more into the forefront. Heck, if we're talking about other characters of color, like interaction between Amethyst and Pearl for instance, Amethyst's behaviors are prioritized on the run. And here's the thing, even if there was this underlying theme of racism, just like you did with Pearl's characterization, you barely use any examples, with the only actual example you use here being the one of Garnet and Pearl in this one scene.
They had a few good ideas and then threw her aside, only to drag her out to either give exposition about Fusion, her, or perv on her. So the one time they really had to think about the weight they put on permafusion, and they are ultimately sabotaged by their own primary theme and their unwillingness to let Pearl be in the wrong without caveats and their own racism. And I'm not gonna soften that one. The shit they pull with Garnet in this show, from her for the drama, to waving her around like a pinup, to just not letting her have character depth, is morally, ethically, spiritually, physically, positively, absolutely, undeniably, and reliably racist.
Okay, there's a lot here. First off, primary theme. What primary theme? Name redacted? Any help here?
Given what she said earlier in the video, and given the context, I assume she must be talking about redemption.
Well, if we were to assume that it was, then sure, but redemption isn't really a primary theme to the show. I'll save it for later if she ever elaborates though. Second off, Pearl wrong without caveats? Where? You mean the episode where she gets called out and acknowledged that she's wrong by Garnet? Space Race where Greg and Steven do? Rose's Scabbard where Amethyst does? Sworn to the Sword where the rest of the gems and Steven acknowledge it? Maybe this is why you think redemption is a primary theme. Cause you think that being called out means that they should have been punished and not immediately forgiven, which actually just means they start to move on. Finally, your evidence of racism. So I guess we're running with the theme that the Crudiverse is racist, because Garnet is the leader and she has to help a member of her team come to terms with her actions and help her move past it. Again, just like before, having this be your one example hurts you more than it helps you.
It's not the only instance of Steven Universe being racist, but it's the only one I'm going to cover for this video.
Thank goodness you stopped there, Lily. Karma was about to have another freakout. In any case, there's something to point out. In the previous video, Lily also made the same claim, that Sugawite's character and development was a result of racism within the Crewniverse. However, she scrapped that part for multiple reasons. First, it was discovered that this part was plagiarized from an essay discussing the same thing, just like Red Van Buskirk's section.
The most blatantly daunting part about this episode is that this subduing of a large black woman is considered a way to make Pearl better as a character and a person. Pearl's growth in this episode hinged on her ability to tear apart a large, unrepentant black woman. She sings a damn song about how she can't be strong in a real way until she can take on this big fucking brute.
Second, she said that she largely disagreed with that section and doesn't stand by it anymore. As a result, she tried redoing that part, skipping over the part she plagiarized entirely by not talking about Sugawite. A rather devious move, one might say, but I won't focus on it for too long. Let's keep going.
This is what I mean when I say that full creative freedom won't make a better show, because the fundamentals of how to work with symbolism and just how to resolve some pretty cut and dry conflicts are things that Crooniverse has consistently struggled with.
Hey, remember when she ignored the visual symbolism of volleyball with the clamshell trapping both pearls for reverting back to their pearl behaviors of defending their diamonds? Or the visual symbolism of how Garnet and Pearl being crushed in friendship represents how their aversion to solving the conflict and cry for help is causing too much tension to rise between them? Or when she ignores the symbolism of It's Over, Isn't It, in Mr. Greg, instead acting as if it wallpapers over important moments? In any case though, cut and dry conflicts, eh? What did you have in mind?
The diamonds are the worst for this.
I'm going to burn a fridge!
The Great Diamond Authority is supposed to be some dysfunctional family. Controlling mom, golden child, other siblings, tantrum throwing out of control child, everything breaks apart, yada yada, your Tamagotchi is sad. But the diamonds are also the cosmic dictators of an intergalactic fascist empire that spans most of the galaxy and whose victims are numerous enough that they're incubating in the Earth's core in a lethal combination of mass grave and weapons of mass destruction. You know, I feel like these two aspects of the diamonds are not really going to gel together.
If you guys didn't or couldn't read the skip card 10 minutes into Lily's video, I told you all to keep something in mind, but if it's been a while, I understand. So I'll verbally ask you all to keep a question in mind. Are the diamonds fascists? I'm sure some of you will have your answers immediately. I'm sure some of you have seen the show and have come to a conclusion one way or another. But whether or not you have this answer, keep this question in mind. And for now, assume that it hasn't been answered yet. This will be important in a bit.
This is one of those instances where you have a good foundation for an interesting story. I mean, my parents are in space and I'm estranged from them isn't a bad one. The progress of Steven learning that Rose wasn't stuck there but hid of her own volition would be interesting. But for some unknown reason, the stakes are artificially inflated so fucking high. So it's not just my parents are in space and I'm estranged from them, it's my parents are in space and I'm estranged from them and that estrangement has a body count in the trillions, also Earth will blow up if we don't make up and become a family.
I feel like the thing that infuriates me the most about this part is the for some unknown reason part, as if Lily's trying her hardest to avoid thinking that the writers have reasons for their writing decisions. You see, given the fact that Steven Universe is an action-adventure based cartoon, the constant threat of the diamonds and how they've affected so many characters of the show actually don't artificially inflate stakes. If anything, it makes the stakes a good metaphor for the power that they actually have over the family and everything that they care about, as sometimes they do have that power, and heck, it can be tied into the plot as well. The fact that they were too powerful to stop with any force, so that Steven was forced to confront them as family, so that they could be on an even playing field and talk to them on their level. The fact that their body count and their continued actions made Rose feel so awful for what they did to other planets that it gave Rose a reason to estrange herself from the diamonds and keep her ideals intact, caring about the gems that were hurt by them rather than her family. And the fact that if Steven isn't able to confront them, then the Earth is destroyed, shows another similar display of power. Now, were the stakes raised really fast? I'd say yes, but it's not necessarily from an artificial standing.
So the thing about estranged family is you're not really required to become unestranged. You can just stay estranged. At time of making the old video, I was estranged from all of my immediate relatives, and at the time of making this one, I'm tentatively on sociable terms with 3 of them, and the 4th I would like to forget ever existed, but I did that at my own pace. Crooniverse really doesn't like the idea of disowning family and making a new one.
Tentatively on social terms, eh? So you mean like taking your own time to talk to them but not trying to spend more time with them than you need to because of how many things they've done in the past to you and others around you? You mean like Steven? And what's this? Making a new family after disowning one? Like, for instance, abandoning your family and taking such a stance against them that supports a group that is closer to you emotionally rather than by familial connection, allowing them to forge their own destinies and whatnot? You mean what Rose did? The thing that nobody in the show says is a bad idea other than the villains? The thing that Steven continues to do?
So the story is filled with 17 different traps so that Pink Diamond pretty much has no choice but to make nice with her controlling family, and actively refusing to do so is routinely characterized as a selfish decision. Because that's what happens when you give family drama a body count.
You mean the decision to try and reason with her family to stop colonizing different planets and ended up staying with the gem she's befriended, giving up her status of power and doing her best to save the Earth for as long as she lives from the diamonds? Actually, it's been characterized as selfless, in the fact that what she did helped so many people. The only thing that is really characterized by her selfishness in that aspect is the sense that she hid the secret of who she was from so many people. And of course, there's things like her selfishness when dealing with gems like Spinel and the rest of the gems serving under her, but specifically, when it comes to dealing with her family and the aftermath of this, it was a selfless action.
Understandably, most people don't like this story because it's gross. It's astounding just how much has to be taken out of the character's hands and how high the stakes have to be and how much the story has to railroad itself entirely because not reuniting with the rest of the diamonds is just instantly, the moment you even think about it, the rational, correct, and healthy decision to make.
Now there's a point here, and I could definitely see it, if you didn't forget what kind of show this was. And this time, I'm not approaching it from the angle of seeing it as an action-adventure cartoon like Climber did, but the fact that, well, it's a kid's cartoon. I'm not using it to disparage the audience for enjoying it, but I'm using this to point out that not everyone has a choice in the matter to ignore their family, or the power to stay permanently estranged from this family, or run away from home, especially to children or young adults in the audience.
Steven Universe showcases this through the Diamonds, who have the power to destroy and control his world and his found family, characters that believe, more than anything, that their power makes them right about everything, shutting down any new ideas or concepts, and in this world where there's nothing that Steven can do, and he can't do nothing, he does what he can.
It's like all those shows that try to make civil rights groups into villains, including Steven Universe itself, funnily enough, and they have to do so much work to make you not side with them. What did Bismuth want to do? Kill 3 dictators and liberate Homeworld. You wouldn't know that if you talked to the fanbase. The fanbase seems convinced she was a Blood Knight who wanted to murder all Homeworld gems, but I've gone over Bismuth's episode with a fine-tooth comb, and the fanbase just fucking made that up.
A fine-tooth comb, you say? Well, you better get a new one if you've come to this incorrect conclusion 4 times. First off, let's talk about the episode, the one in which Bismuth talked about the upper crust, not just the diamonds, but the upper tier of the Homeworld gems, and heck, sometimes regular Homeworld gems. Like, there's a near half and half distribution to which one she's talking about. Even if we assume that it was just the upper crust, that would include sapphires and pearls as well. Along with that, way to throw the fan base under the bus with that, as seen from these comments I have from my Easy Peasy video. From a general viewpoint, the fan base doesn't really see her as a Blood Knight. In fact, a lot of the fan base likes her, as well as believes that Bismuth was correct, which you pointed out in your original video.
Steven only stops Bismuth by getting a drop on her and managing to destabilize her form and put her gem back in its bubble. Steven has to resort to violence because he can't actually convince Bismuth that she's wrong, because she isn't wrong.
Everyone and their grandmother was tearing this episode apart with a fucked up lol so neutral hack of a theme, and the crew just let it happen.
I wonder why the change, yet both you and the fanbase have something pretty big wrong. Bismuth isn't painted like a villain. Instead, she's painted as someone with different ideals than that of Steven. Not necessarily a villain, but just a different perspective. Neither of them are 100% wrong, nor right. Goodness, that's more deja vu.
Furthermore, the show ties all of its metaphysics into the diamonds. Without the diamonds, they can't make new gems, they can't fix old gems, and the gems are doomed to erode out of existence. I'm gonna coin a new term and call this coercive world building. Any reasonable person would go, "This bitch fascist," and kick White Diamond out of a fucking window. And in response, Becky goes, you can't because, the goop that makes the gems comes from the diamonds, and also the diamonds are the only ones who can heal the gems, so you can't kill them or you'll doom the gems to go extinct, so like, do better.
Hey kids, you know that abusive family that you try to estrange yourself from because they don't respect you, your friends, or your lifestyle, yet still have control over your life through finances or general public opinion? Just move! It's that easy! Why hasn't anyone else done this? Do better!
A storytelling decision, just to justify previous story decisions that people are questioning? Okay then, ignoring the fact that this also has to do with assuming the development cycle of Steven Universe, that being that storytelling decisions are made purely as an answer to questions that the fans have, there's the fact that this is just called a plot device, that being anything that's used to push a story forward, therefore justifying previous decisions.
Also, this is a pretty weird argument, specifically the "this bitch fascist" part. Now, I'm not gonna tell you to let go of it yet, but notice the reasoning that she's using. Why are they fascist? Because, come on, be reasonable, and that's it. Even if you know what happened and still come to the same conclusion, expecting people to just get it without explaining anything about it is not good. And it gets even weirder when you use this to sidestep how the conflict is actually presented in the show, and rather just talking about it in real life. You know, sidestepping critique of the show just to be like, you can handle it really easy in real life. Not only is this a weird criticism to make considering how much fiction there is that doesn't just simplify characters as bad people that deserve to die, to talk about the ramifications of actually going through it, but it ends up gutting any actual meaning to the story by removing it from its fictional context. A good example is, say, Ice King, who suffers from Alzheimer's, and having a powerful powerful episode, I Remember You, as a reflection as to how it affects the people around him, and then remembering that this is just a result of a magic crown that affects his memories, and once it's gone, he's back to normal. While it's not a true reflection of Alzheimer's within the confines of the fictional world it takes place in, it's still understandable and emotionally effective. But lastly, this is the part where we get to the conclusion that Steven Universe actually puts in a bunch of non-thought out loopholes to get to this conclusion. And if you're bringing, while building, into this again, I guess we'll review it. Let's let it all end. In the final confrontation, they faced Yellow and Blue, but they were too powerful, there's nothing they can do. They survived the all-out Gemma attack, but Perry and Lapis faded black, and this was after Blue made them cry and fall back. If they got lucky and they killed one, then the damage to the rest of them won't be fun, as they'll do what they did when Pink Diamond died, a mass attempt at mass gem homicide. And if they got 3 for 3 a peaceful time, it won't be. The vengeance of gems like Jasper and Eyeball after thee. So let it be known that the world building is tight, and it shouldn't be dismissed because they couldn't win the fight.
Now that's one way to go about fostering reconciliation of an estranged family. Another option is to have literally anyone involved actually interested in said reconciliation, but your idea is good.
Because that's the thing, nobody cares. At all. Blue Diamond is grieving, but she's not doing anything.
Except for making the human zoo, also going with Yellow to the Earth to destroy it.
Yellow is just going to blow up the planet and wash her hands of it.
Oh, speaking of, I wonder why, in What's the Use of Feeling Blue, that we see Blue grieving and Yellow talking about blowing up the planet. Maybe because they still miss Pink, and at the very end, when Pink was revealed to be alive, they went out of their way to reconcile with her?
White Diamond is too busy trying to hunt down and exterminate Homeworld's underground jewels.
Hey, remember how White Diamond looked at all of this and believed that she knows better than Pink, believing this all to be a super long game, and that she just doesn't take the rebellion seriously at all?
And every version of Pink Diamond looks at the other diamonds with complete and total contempt.
It's almost like Pink Diamond doesn't want to reconcile with that family of hers that wouldn't listen to her, believing it to not do any good and estranging from her family in the first place. Huh. Estranging. Wait a minute.
Even outside that immediate family, so to speak, the Diamonds are completely hated. Even after their redemption, not a single character has a kind thing to say about them. Nobody in the cast wanted this reconciliation, so why did we do this?
It's almost like they weren't redeemed.
Oh boy, I guess we're at that part now.
Oh yeah, we're at that part now.
This isn't even a thematic issue. Making the characters involved invested in the thing you want them to do is like writing 101.
We go from Steven going, we're family, we have to be family, and then one episode later it's like, oh, these fucking guys again. He was so invested in this reconciliation, and then he just gave up, seemingly off screen.
Almost like he did that to save the Earth because he knew that the Diamonds cared so much about Pink. Almost like he's on tentatively social terms with them.
Well, we know why. The Diamonds' redemption was the single most contentious thing the show ever did. You spend the entire show being told, yep, they're evil, they're oppressive, they do genocide, they hate non-stated relationships, they don't respect people's identities, all the people they want to exterminate are branded with stars. And then suddenly the show just fucking 180s and goes OMG like cringe aunties.
Okay everyone, still keep that secret for a bit. We'll get to more soon, but think about it here, because this is the extent of her proving this. But all this proves is that the Diamonds are evil, oppressive, genocidal, race mix-hating, bigoted characters. And as bad as all of those things are, there's nothing to officially point the finger towards fascism, except that one Nazi joke thing that you put in there, which, yeah, can you not? And at the tail end of that, we know that it's not sudden. While Steven does offer some advice and they heal the corrupted gems together, that's all they do. We get Steven's feelings about them in the song Change Your Mind, where he straight up rejects any respect or love that the Diamonds are trying to give him, and just say that they can know him if they change their minds. Then, after 2 years, I need to emphasize 2 years have passed, we get to see the Diamonds are each on their path to getting better in various ways. They stopped their evil reign, they aren't oppressing anyone anymore, they're going out of their way to fix the damages that they've done to the gems that they've harmed, and they try to reverse their bigoted ways of thinking. Now, is it perfect? No, and that's because they aren't redeemed. As the movie, future, and even the ending of Change Your Mind show to an extent, the Diamonds aren't perfectly good, nor treated as such by anyone, nor has anyone forgotten all the horrible things they've done, but they're making gradual efforts each, and, to reiterate it, it doesn't mean that they're fully forgiven yet, nor have they gone through redemption. Wait a second, only seeing them as cringe aunties? Are you mixing how the fanbase perceives these characters with how the show actually presents them again? Because this is absolutely not what the show does, and we can see that by having them fix their mistakes. The show never erases what they've done to reduce them to cringe aunties, and the only ones who do are people that think that the characters themselves separated from the plot of Steven Universe, kinda act like that, the same way that Phoenix and Edgeworth or Marcel and Fallon are shipped.
It's clear at some point Redeem the Villains was written on a post-it note somewhere, and they just never went back to think about that. If you're going to do that, if you're going to go, this is a show about forgiveness and redemption, then fine. Just dial back the stakes, you hyperactive weirdo.
Let's ignore the assuming the writer's intention again, because wow, here we get it. I don't know who the heck said that the show was about forgiveness or redemption, but, not really. They do play in a few big points, but the show's main themes are about how to deal with emotions and understanding others, about different types of love and relationships, how to forge stronger interpersonal relationships through communication and whatnot. As an example, here are 5 articles that talk about the themes of the show, and how none of them have to do with forgiveness and redemption.
The overarching themes of love, diversity, and expression of feelings sets a precedent for how family cartoons can be handled. Its unique lightheartedness and sweetness while tackling complicated issues resonates with so many fans and is extremely refreshing.
For all its intergalactic drama and hard-won lessons, Steven Universe is still at its core about Steven and his loving family helping each other throughout whatever comes their way.
One of the most intriguing aspects of Steven Universe is the way it explores complex and thought-provoking themes throughout the series. From gender identity and representation to mental health and family dynamics, the show tackles a wide range of topics with sensitivity and nuance. Additionally, Steven Universe also explores the concept of empathy and the importance of understanding and accepting others who may be different from ourselves. The show explores complex themes such as identity, friendship, love, and trauma, which are all intricately intertwined in the characters' relationships.
Love in general, whether it's between families and friends, lovers, or out-of-this-world space rocks, and both the acceptance and championship of that love, is a key tenet of the show, and a noble message for any show, let alone a children's cartoon series.
The show's strongest themes are about gender, identity, and love.
Along with that, there are 2 videos that I linked that talk about it.
And that's really what Steven Universe is about. It's a show about love in all of its different forms.
In general, I would say Steven Universe is a show about relationships, but also about communication and trauma.
And I thought the best way to convey this was to zone in on the core theme of the show: love.
If you truly want a show about redemption, look at Has Been Hotel. Whether or not you like it, the show goes out of its way to question what it means to be redeemed, who deserves to be redeemed, and what the redemption looks like. It's the entire plot, the entire premise, the entire modus operandi of the show, and its characters' struggles and emotions. This is what it actually means to have these themes in your shows.
This is the problem with writing on presumption.
Oh, like you're one to talk. You've gone out of your way to write so many of these script points on presumption, presuming how the show is able to air the episodes, presuming why Rebecca Sugar writes certain things into shows, or presuming that the reason why the pacing is so rushed is because of weebs, and Rebecca Sugar trying to get as much as she can into the show because it was her only shot. This is a bunch of baloney.
Steven Universe is only notable because villain redemptions always had that one line they would never cross, usually by just not including them. But Steven Universe did it. They jumped that line and they never lived it down, so I don't feel compelled to rub the show's nose in it any further.
Even fans, blind idiot stands notwithstanding, will say this story completely fucking sucks. So the discussion is pretty much over, and no amount of defensive entries on TV Trope's Common Knowledge segment will change that.
Okay, this will be a long one. First off, let's pull out that question that I provided to you earlier, because it's finally time to tackle it. So, what's the answer to the question, are the Diamonds fascist? First off, let's look at everything that the Diamonds do. The Diamonds go from planet to planet, colonizing them for their own use, and exploiting them for resources. We see this multiple times in both Rose's backstory and Amethyst's backstory, in which the resources of the planet are drained in order to make more soldiers. We also see this in It Could Have Been Great, in which we see the Diamonds' plans for the Earth, including the efficient use of all available resources. The Diamonds made sure that, wherever they went, their values and social structure would remain as such throughout their reign. We see this in The Answer, in which Blue Diamond enforced such rules on Earth, as well as everywhere that the gems visit being under that ruling. The gem inhabitants of the planet were treated as expendable tools used for labor and resource extraction. We see this in Message Received, with how Yellow Diamond treated Peridot and all the extractors that we see. The reason as to why the Diamonds are expanding is because they justified that no other life that exists could be as righteous as the gems, or at least deserve to be on their level. Hence why all the Diamonds and even Peridot initially see organic life as beneath them. All of these aspects point to the Diamonds being colonizers, rather than being fascists. When it comes to the goals goals, methods, and ideologies of each system, you can also see where the comparison to fascism fails. Colonialism involves exploiting resources through colonization, forcing the native public to deal with it, and justify it through believing that they're superior to the lives that they colonize, like an alien colony, or any Save the Rainforest message, with their focus being on expansion, extraction, and cultural imposition. Fascism involves gaining control of a unified government with extreme nationalism, focusing on an internal purity of thought and suppressing any dissent in that already existing government through violence and propaganda, like Bellows from the Owl House or the Phoenix King, with their focus being on totalitarian control, militarism, propaganda, the express suppression of dissent, and the creation of a cult of personality. The biggest problem with claiming the Diamonds are fascist, which I briefly mentioned in my bismuth video, is their lack of an actual political goal, something that the Fire Lord and Bellows have, as rather than expanding their rule to make the world know that the gems are the best or anything like that, they expand just to expand their resources. Fascism involves having a strong sense of nationalism and a unity of the state, trying to make a homogeneous national identity, pursuing policies to eradicate internal differences and promote national pride. The Diamonds don't really pursue it by any political means. The only thing you could probably say is that they attack the crystal gems, but that wasn't specifically because of any ideological difference. Essentially, they don't want to destroy the crystal gems because they deserve to die, but for a pragmatic reason, because they interfere with the Diamonds trying to take the Earth's resources and expand their territory. And to clarify, I'm saying this for the structure of their society as presented in the show, taking this outside of the personal reasons that Blue and Yellow have. Speaking of, fascism also includes being militaristic and expansionist, so it seems like the Diamonds would fit at home here. However, it fits under colonialism more, as their expansion, once again, isn't something explicitly political, like spreading the ideology of gem superiority to everyone else. Rather, it's, once again, for their own practical purposes, creating more gems. And lastly, fascism involves totalitarian control and ideological purity, which, while you could point to it with the rigid caste system that they have, they do not do so to promote an ideological purity or the promotion of a single unifying ideology. Their control is more about maintaining order and ensuring the efficient operation of the empire, once again, not for a political reason, but for a pragmatic reason, that being everybody doing their jobs to make more gems. The goal of colonialism fits with territorial expansion, taking over planets one by one, cultural imposition, trying to rid the organic life of the planets, and strategic control, to take over the planets more efficiently. To make a long story short, the biggest difference between them is that one of them is a political ideology, and one of them is a type of expansion. And, to be fair, there's a lot of overlap, and many people could argue that the Diamonds also suppress dissent through violence, and they might have a few fascist tendencies, but all those same tendencies can also be seen in colonialism. Now, this is all to say, why does any of this matter? So the Diamonds are one type of bad instead of another type of bad. Big whoop. Well, it is. The reason why is that it's an accurate representation of the motivations and actions of the Diamonds. One that factors in not just what they do to other gems under their rule, but the planets that they've severely impacted due to their actions. One that brings all of that together rather than just ignoring it. If we believe that the Diamonds are fascist, then we overlook their goals, we overlook the messages that the show tries to teach about colonialism, and most importantly, we simplify a very complex issue. It would mean that the only thing that would ever really change to show that they've learned anything is them not being in power anymore. It gives the illusion that they flipped from being super evil to super good, and the only thing that we would gain from it is that the Diamonds have changed their minds, which is okay. It makes sense given Steven's powers and their ways of thinking, but it doesn't really help anyone affected by their actions, nor does it accurately portray fascism, which were some of the same conclusions that Just Stop and We Are Not Alive made about the show. Viewing the Diamonds as colonizers highlights their actions and the show's messages on decolonization, rather than oversimplifying their behavior. Addressing their colonialist tendencies allows for a real change and reconciliation, compared to simply flipping from evil to good or taking their word for it. This distinction is crucial for understanding the full impact of their actions and the show's themes. It would be like claiming that The Last Airbender's themes are about environmentalism. Not only is it inaccurate, but framing it in such a way makes you misunderstand the themes of the show and oversimplify them. Hypothetically, you could say that the Fire Nation is the only one that's causing environmental harm, and as a result, it makes it so that by stopping the Fire Nation, they stop all pollution from ever existing on the land. Again, oversimplifying a very complex issue. But let's throw all of that aside for now, and talk about Lily's argumentation. In this part, she blatantly uses the no true Scotsman fallacies, as the real fans will say that the story completely sucks, not those blind idiot fanboys like, oh, I don't know, anyone who disagrees with her opinion, like a trope page pointing out common knowledge in Steven Universe instead of, well, fans that aren't blind idiots, I guess. Second off, Lily goes out of her way to ignore what the page says on TV tropes and just says, lol, this is so cringe, you guys, without even considering what it says, even though it blatantly disproves Lily's information, by providing more examples and whatnot to prove itself, instead of blatantly cherry picking. This is Lily ignoring anything that doesn't support her confirmation bias, and something that ties back to the very beginning, where she says that nobody ever wants to talk about how good Steven Universe is.
This is the problem with writing on presumption.
And here's the thing, Lily barely presented any evidence that the Diamonds are indeed fascist, and only presented evidence that they were authoritarian dictators. Fun fact though, you don't need to have fascism to have that. Like the TV tropes page says, you could be colonial, and honestly, given the status of the gems and what they try to do, it absolutely makes sense that they aren't fascist and instead colonialist. Like the trope page says, the reason why they exist is to increase their numbers, like an insect colony, with the problem being the resources drained from the earth, leading to the rebellion, leading to the war, leading to the corruption blast, yada yada yada. Comparing it to the TV tropes page that actually backs its sources, unless you truly believe that Lily can do no wrong, comparatively there's no reason to believe Lily other than, you're cool, right? Only cool people think that the Diamonds are Nazis. The only reason that any of this is cut and dry is because you made it cut and dry by sucking out the nuance.
Do you, need a break?
I need some plushies.
You'll get them in a bit, Climber, but I just wanted to point out one more thing. So, do you know what else is on the common knowledge section of that TV tropes page? A debunking of fusion being equal to sex, and debunking of the myth that the show gives away endless forgiveness to every single villain. Kinda weird that Lily is trying to give a retrospective on a show that she doesn't even have common knowledge for.
All over the show, on a thematic level, you see the same problem that affects the plot and characters. Most of their ideas suffer from distractions and the ramping up of stakes for absolutely no reason, and the fact that they don't think about how these stories should conclude and brute force them to all conclude the same way.
There's a good way to do the sardonyx arc, but for the good of everyone involved, it requires removing the part where Pearl... Maybe replace it with... oh, and I'm just spitballing here, a quiet conversation where characters are emotionally vulnerable with each other as they talk about insecurities and weaknesses and strength. You know, the part where Steven Universe really shines and don't get interrupted by a death trap.
Wait, weren't we here before?
Well, in any case, I gave my reasons as to why a quiet conversation wouldn't have worked necessarily, especially given Pearl's solution of just trying to get everything back to normal. But there's one thing to point out. Says all the stories ended the same way. Brings up an example where they didn't.
Ironically, the best episodes of this show are either when characters are just sitting and talking, or the ones that are just this high-concept mood piece. It works when it's being 2.5 gems or Tree of Life, but when it's trying to be this genre smorgasbord of bad anime from the 80s, that's when it falls over.
Man, Lily is just really digging at anime when it comes to Steven Universe, isn't she? Also, sure, there are episodes like The Answer, Log Date 7152, and Single Pale Rose that fit into that, but there's a lot of episodes that are considered the best that don't fall into these things. Highlights like On the Run, Jailbreak, Bismuth, Mr. Greg, and Mindful Education.
Wait a second, Climber. Lily already said that Mindful Education and Bismuth weren't that good.
And that's kind of the problem with talking about the best episodes of a show overall when Lily's own perspective conflicts with the concept of subjectivity existing.
So many of the show's strangest moments seem like they were made entirely to be more like Utena, but ironically they forget the one thing that made Utena worth watching at least once in spite of the drugged up nonsense.
Now, I hope that you enjoyed the parts of the video that were related to Steven Universe and Lily's criticisms of it, because we're done with it. The last 10 minutes are all about what she got wrong from the original video.
Wait, but if you got to around 45 minutes in, and the last 10 minutes are about that, then what are the other 5 minutes that make up this hour?
I'm glad you asked. You see, those 5 minutes will be about Lily Orchard talking about Utena, and basically everything that isn't Steven Universe. I'm not joking. The rest of this segment is talking about Revolutionary Girl Utena, summarizes what she believes to be the themes of the ending, as well as her own experiences.
Doesn't that break up the pace of a review if she just goes in to talk about it for a good 1/12 of the video?
Now you're catching on. Okay, I'm gonna lie down for a bit. Can you take a majority of this?
I guess I can. How about you have a good rest there?
For those who haven't seen it, and I'm giving you the very basic version here, Utena is a story about a girl getting wrapped into a dueling tournament where the prize is an actual human person being sold off like cattle. And when she discovers that this girl is basically a slave, resolves to win specifically to free her. She wasn't even in the competition to win this girl, she just wanted to fight. But ultimately she fails, and Anthe has to be the one to free herself by actually wanting to believe that things could be better. And in the end, she walks away and goes to find her maybe dead, maybe missing fiancé.
Now, there's nothing really I want to counter yet from a Utena standpoint, but I feel like this content warning should have been there the first time she talked about Utena, as well as all the other times Asterisk had to be there for your jokes involving Pearl and Garnet.
The thing is, the undercurrent of the show comes to a head in the penultimate episode where Utena professes she's going to win Anthe so nobody can hurt her, but Anthe has heard this line before.
This is still ultimately someone trying to control her, however well-meaning they may be, and she is likely setting herself up for more abuse.
This point sorta undersells the friendship that Anthe has with Utena throughout the series, and the fact is he still thinks about their friendship, despite the betrayal at the end of the 12-episode arc that shoulda cut her off.
Concluding that the devil you know is better than the devil you don't, she stabs Utena in the back. Literally. Utena got it into her head that she could beat the villain at their own game, and it ultimately got her killed because it eroded the trust Anthe had in her.
Whoa there, slow down. Well, I know you're trying to skim through this for the sake of your audience who you care about. You're missing a key piece of information. Akio. After all, the reason why Anthe not only believed the devil that she knows and had her trust eroded in Utena was as a result of Akio's impact and manipulation. Someone who has manipulated, coerced, and groomed Anthe into following his orders over someone like Utena in order for Akio to gain the power that he hoped for.
Utena might have had good intentions, but Anthe doesn't know that. This is not a system designed for benevolence. It's meant for power, and the victims of that system will not believe you when you say you're going to be benevolent with it.
It's only when Utena approaches Anthe as an equal and a companion that Anthe's hope for something better returns to her.
Wait a second.
Wow, you came back quick.
Well, yeah, for a bit, because something seemed off about this last part. While it isn't exact, wouldn't you agree that someone trying to resolve their conflict, then being called out or punished as a result of it, and then after the two parties see each other as equals, they gain that hope for something better will return? Wouldn't you say that all this stuff is similar to what happened in Sardonyx?
But the execution in her eyes could be flawed, couldn't it?
That's fair, but it also seems that they remembered the one thing that made Utena worth watching, at least according to this.
This is actually a very basic through line for a lot of thematic and socio-political issues. This is the core fallacy behind, say, police reform.
The police, as they exist as a concept, was designed to protect the interests of wealthy landowners. In the US, they were literally just slave catchers. Trying to reform them is like trying to repurpose a gun into a bandage.
Okay, police reform? You didn't need any of this. Like, if you just said that first sentence, you could have avoided making a tangent within a tangent. But to talk about another part, the one which you say that if a system is used for power, the victims won't believe you when you say that you'll be benevolent with them. That's not entirely true. In fact, there's a trope called Hoist by His Own Petard, in which a character can use a system used by a villain to destroy said villain or system. A famous example is Hansel and Gretel, using the witch's oven to destroy the witch. But more common ones include Aladdin, trapping Jafar in the lamp, ending every Danganronpa game through the system that they set up, trying to end the Hunger Games using the Hunger Games, and ending the Demon War in Yu Yu Hakusho by using his role to instead hand the leadership position to whoever wins a tournament every few years.
Now, if that's the theme you took from Utena, that's a great foundation to inspire a story, and it can inspire any story you could possibly imagine. But it seems like what Becky took from Utena was abused ballerina sword lesbian, which is keeping in line with how the fandom tends to remember any given work.
Wait a second, isn't this you wishing that Steven Universe was another story instead? If not, then what's the point of this? You can get inspired by any aspect of anything. For instance, being inspired by Frankenstein so much that you just put him in your show, like in Dragon Ball, or Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and putting him in One Piece. Not everything is trying to be a deconstruction or a reconstruction of a genre, like with Owl House or Little Witch Academia.
There's a lot in Steven Universe about revolutionizing the world, but in Utena that was a red herring for the villains, and Steven Universe doesn't do anything with the idea other than Steven giving a magical feel-better speech.
In Utena, revolutionizing the world has a whole different meaning. The themes of it are expressly to make oneself in the world. This is most clearly shown with the ending of the series, as Anthe has the freedom to finally leave her school after all this time. For this, we'll just leave this on the back burner and address the arguments as if she means, like, causing a revolution and changing the world.
There's almost that theme in there with Steven being really pacifist, but instead of talking about the use of systems created specifically for power and domination being inherently harmful, it just goes, wah, violence bad, which in terms of insightful and profound themes is like waxing a car with a dog turd.
Or, actually revolutionizing the world, getting diamonds out of the positions of power, helping gems find purpose in anything other than serving the diamonds. I feel like that's all that talks about revolutionizing the world, and there's really not much evidence of that being a main theme of the show, but still, this right here, this is a problem that comes with reading the diamonds as fascism instead of colonialism. The fact that she sees the system as one for power and domination alone, rather than building up their numbers and continuing growth alone, because the latter is true. Her argument doesn't make any sense, it just simplifies the theme to wah, violence bad, instead of, trying to see any insightful or profound themes in the work.
Also, you argue that it's a red herring for the villains when first off, it's not. That was Akio's entire plan for Anthe. But second off, it ignores the fact that revolutionizing the entire system is what Utena tries to do as well. by trying to get Anthe out of Akio's whole plan.
To its credit, Utena never explicitly makes this theme, it just kind of sits there with it and expects you to get it, which is probably why we're in this mess.
Wait, so you're mad at Steven Universe for doing something that Utena does as thematic inspiration from the show, and says that Utena doesn't even explicitly use that as a theme? So how would you know that Steven Universe is taking inspiration from Utena?
It's filtering Utena through the lens of early adolescent nostalgia, so about half the themes are either being filtered out or interpreted in rather simple ways. If you don't get distance from a piece of art before revisiting it, you tend to keep your childhood interpretation of it. And looking at how that interpretation manifests, it seems like what Becky took from it was a lot of surface level visuals.
Half the themes. You mean the one theme involved with power and benevolence? As you admitted that the revolutionizing the world and violence is bad one wasn't explicitly made? Or do you actually mean many of the other themes that totally came from Utena? Like Amethyst's body issues, the inferiority issues of Steven and Amethyst, the relationship issues that Garnet has, the handling of unlearning harmful rhetoric like with Peridot, or dealing with abusive relationships and PTSD like Lapis did. Also, I, for one, am thankful that you acknowledge that it takes service level visuals from Utena, after arguing that a good chunk of the show and its themes were actually inspired from Utena when talking about the Pearl arc.
I've spoken with other people who like this show, and the consensus between us was that if Utena was a primary inspiration, Becky at most only half got it.
Okay.
Sugar says that as a teenager, the Utena series was an epiphany for me. The way that it plays with the semiotics of gender. I was a bisexual teenager watching a show like Utena. It was stunning. I related to it in a way that I had never really felt before, and it really stuck with me.
There you go. That's the inspiration that Lily has been talking about. Literally just how they express gender, period. Nothing story-wise, nothing theme-wise, no gay relationships, nothing like that. Of course, none of you would know that this is the one place that Rebecca Sugar acknowledges Utena as an inspiration for Steven Universe through interviews, because just like so much through this video, Lily doesn't present any evidence to any reference that Steven Universe has gotten from Utena, or that Rebecca Sugar even liked Utena.
But that's not a criticism. I'm not criticizing Becky here, it's just more of a neutral statement of fact. And as I came to that conclusion, I actually found a lot of value in Steven Universe, but maybe not in the way the creator intended. Let's see, how do I put this? So I'm a writer myself, both personally as I work on my own hobbies, and professionally through this channel and ghostwriting on the side. I've been writing stories since I was 14, and the main piece of original fiction I've been working on the last few years is called Scars, a story set in the 90s about two people who have been as close as they can possibly be since they were kids, contrasting their very different lived experience. The primary theme, like with most of my work, is love, how love is the universal need, and how it's what keeps people going in bleak or even dreary circumstances. It's a very quiet story, it's almost mundane.
Stories since you were 14, huh? You mean like,
Clyber, no, don't do that.
But, okay, I guess it doesn't make sense here. Can I at least talk about Scars?
Tangentially.
Okay, fair enough. Scars is a somewhat controversial story that Lily was working on around this time, one that got a lot of backlash around the time that Sai, an art streamer, pointed out that it had a few objectionable moments. I'm not going to use this part to talk about those aspects, but rather a few things in regard to them to use as an example. First off, isn't it weird how she says that a primary theme is love? I wonder why that sounds familiar. Second,
there's always the risk that after a bad episode, your Twitter mentions are going to be flooded, but honestly, I think showrunners should just not have Twitter anyway. That's just bad for you.
Considering the fact that this work of yours is rather objectionable, why do you still have a Twitter?
When I talk about it, people ask me what my inspiration is, and they're very confused when I look them dead in the eye and say Kingdom Hearts.
I mean, I would be confused if you didn't already bring it up multiple times.
That throws people for a loop because they know Kingdom Hearts is that anime game with Mickey Mouse in it where Donald kills a Power Ranger with a Dragon Ball laser. And if I were still 13, I'd have the same reaction. But as an adult replaying these games and seeing the series conclude its primary story, I didn't so much take the ballerina sword fighting or the big expansive anime plot from it. I took the story about the love Sora has for his friends and how it not only gives him strength but protects him. How many characters are built to be puppets of the main antagonist and go on this emotionally grueling journey to discover their own identities. How holding love close to your heart can keep you going even if you feel like you're completely alone. These are themes that the creator always had on his mind, and playing these games as a child, a particularly lonely child at that really resonated with me even if I didn't realize it.
It's only playing them as an adult I was consciously aware of them, and those concepts are universal.
This is extremely narcissistic of you to try and use your work and how you take inspiration from something as an example of the correct way to take inspiration from something, as if you know how Rebecca Sugar got inspiration from Utena. Also, there's something weird about what she brings up, love giving you strength. Like what Steven Universe did, with love helping him gain powers, face obstacles and end up saving the world, puppets of characters that forge their own identities, like Pearl's arc. Love, close to your heart, can keep you going even if you feel like you're completely alone, like Garnet in the last arc.
As I mentioned, there is this interesting theme in Utena about how oppressive systems cannot be weaponized for good. They are designed to resist you doing that. Utena was never going to save Anthe by being the one to own her instead of her brother. A gilded cage is still a cage. And while you can get that theme as an adult by, like, reading the works of Asada Shakur, you can also get it from Lord of the Rings.
But taking a work on its most visceral emotional surface level isn't something exclusive to Becky. They're just the most elaborate about it.
Implying that this is what she does with Pearl. Also in volleyball, don't they have Pearls quite literally rescued from a gilded cage to gain their own forms of independence, and are able to understand one another better as a result? If that's the theme that she apparently took from Utena, it seems like she did a pretty good job of it.
Fandoms are filled with people who simultaneously adore a given work of art, and yet wildly miss the point of it.
This video is proof that you don't need to be in a fandom for that to happen.
Look at how many fans of Fallout or Baldur's Gate see those games as just sandboxes. So much so that both franchises' third entries ended up being watered-down, toothless versions of themselves. So you go from an entire game about resisting the pull of an evil god hellbent on using you as a cosmic soul jar, to a game where you are encouraged at all times to literally shove worms in your brain. This is where nature versus nurture got us, apparently.
I think the worst part about these tangents is that they aren't too long for sure, but they're just long enough that it gets annoying.
And I've been seeing this approach to old works a lot. Works that borrow surface-level features from something the creator really liked, but lacking the narrative or thematic weight. And that's really the core issue of Steven Universe. It has a lot of big ideas, but its understanding of those ideas is through the lens of a nostalgic 13-year-old, grasping at surface-level readings and not understanding why they work.
I'm sorry, core issue? As a review, she brought up Pearl in Last One Out of Beach City, trying to escape the mistakes of her past and aim towards the future, volleyball, in which the two Pearls become free from their Pearl behaviors by escaping the clam, the thing that trapped them together because they were Pearls with their emotions still being tethered to Rose, and their fusion shows that they both made steps in that direction for the better by acknowledging this fall of theirs and being able to express it to one another, ignoring the purpose of the clam. The Sardonyx arc, which talks about the value of honest communication with one another when it comes to acknowledging your failures and moving towards the future as a team, ignoring the purpose of the closing room, and Bismuth and the Diamonds, which I have a whole flowchart explaining, and how she doesn't understand the conflict of the episode as well as conflating the diamonds with fascism. There's definitely some surface level readings and misunderstandings as to why some things work, but it's not from Steven Universe.
The part where Anthe betrays Utena carries a lot of thematic weight to it. It's where Anthe has lost hope and chosen the devil she knows over the unknown that is increasingly looking bleak. It speaks to the way those in abusive situations will often refuse to leave because the unknown is frightening and they think they've already adapted to their own situation.
Wait a second. Now this is very interesting. Only now do you bring up the fact that it was an abusive relationship. Now, maybe you're trying to imply that the system itself is abusive, but doing so would not fit the definition of abusive relationship you put onto it. In fact, it shows a striking question as to who's the one abusing her.
Also, Lapis Lazuli. Like, it's not even funny at this point how she snaps so many arguments of yours in half. If you want to talk about choosing the devil that she knows over the unknown, or gilded cages, look at how Lapis goes back to Homeworld in Season 1, and even feels confused at the prospect of doing so in Same Old World, with Steven helping her out.
And look, I've got no stones to throw in this regard. I'm a writer myself. I have characters for whom I go, that's my baby, they have never done anything wrong in their life. But you don't have to be afraid of people not being on board with it.
It is rather weird that you bring up the favoritism of Pearl here, yet you don't realize that you do the exact same thing to Peridot over Lapis. Even if you think that Lapis doesn't do anything as well as Peridot, you're rejecting a good chunk of the show and the themes it reaches.
Develops ways to cope with abuse, and the hardest part of recovering is when you don't need those strategies anymore. I coped with severe abuse as a child by learning to bite first, to be such a problem, such a disturbance that it wasn't worth it to antagonize me. This had the downside of opening myself to reactive abuse, but in my damaged mind it was worth it. I also been at perfectly nice people who just wanted to be my friend because I was afraid they would hurt me too. Better to cut things off now than wait to be fucked. The hardest part of recovering in my adulthood was learning I didn't need to do that. I didn't need to keep a sheet of glass between me and everyone else. I needed to believe things could be better. And for a very long time I thought I was perfectly fine being completely alone for the rest of my life. Then I met my friends, and I met my wife, and it was like stepping out into the sun for the first time. And it was in that moment I realized I never wanted to be alone again. I've got a long license those days. I don't let a lot of people in, but I actually cherish the ones I do let in. It's a much better place to be.
Now hold on there. I gotta charge you if you bring me in for a therapy session. But while this definitely strays a ton from the point of Steven Universe, I do sympathize with Lily, and I think this is pretty nice to see and hear about. My only question is, where the heck is this going?
This moment resonates with me in particular. For all my criticisms of Utena, I think this is truly wonderful. How does Steven Universe pay homage to what is arguably the biggest moment in the entire series?
It's about waiting carefully for the perfect moment to thrust. Whoopsie daisy!
Actually, if you wanted their homage to Utena, you had the sword fight from earlier in that same episode. Also, this does ignore the plot of the rest of the episode, which is about the grief that Steven feels after Pearl dies, and having to wait for her to recover. While it isn't as heavy as that scene, it's still a relatively emotional scene in the context of Steven Universe, unless you wanted this scene to copy Utena whole cloth to mimic the emotional weight of the scene, in which case that would amplify your problem with the show, bounding from greatness to great piles of shit.
You know, not to hit below the belt or anything, but if I had written a story like Utena, and this was how presumably the biggest fan of my work chose to pay homage to the single heaviest moment in the story where all the themes at play finally settle in on the viewer, I would take that as the most damning indictment of my entire career. I'm quite critical of Utena, but I can't think of anything harsher to say about it than some of its fans do when they pay homage to it.
I've been pulling my punches on my critique of this show to avoid letting things get too aggressive like the last one, but this is fucking pathetic.
I don't think this is all that professional, but go ahead, Climber.
So let me get this straight. You decided to bring up your trauma, how you recovered, and the friendships you've made. Stuff that I must imagine would be pretty heavy for you to take one scene from Steven Universe out of context and call the show pathetic for not copying Utena's big emotional moment and using it the way that Utena did? Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. She's referring to the biggest fan of her work, that being Rebecca Sugar, yet again. You wanna know what's really pathetic? The fact that this is just emotional manipulation, based on a flimsy conclusion that you came to, with less evidence than your assertion of fascism to the diamonds, that you spent 5 minutes of your video covering to get to.
I would also like to say that unlike a lot of points of the 2-hour video, even including the racism part, it's hard to take this as hyperbolic and rather an assertion of something negative towards the creator.
At least we're at the final segment. Only 10 more minutes ago. What's the worst that can happen?
If you just skip to this segment here, then hi, how are you? Having a good day? I think there's a fundamental difference between being wrong about something and your opinion and analysis changing over time. That's the folly of having one video become way more popular than all your other videos. Most people just won't see the newer stuff.
Oh, okay. So in summary, the answer to the question is no.
Well, hold on, Climber. She only has 10 minutes of the video left. She'll probably talk about it a little bit more.
Okay, fair enough, but if anyone did skip to this section, I'm sure that's what they would come out of that video with.
Over the years, Steven Universe has become something of a critical muse. I talk about cartoons for a living. It's not a glamorous job, but then neither is yours. And one problem I've had over the last few years is that shows that are interesting to talk about and shows that actually pull in the views don't really overlap.
If you want to pay your rent, you have to talk about the latest story-driven adventure fantasy show, and they're all so samey and boring that there's just nothing really to talk about.
On the one hand, I completely get it. While it may be easy to criticize her not-so-good takes, this is the hole that she dug for herself. And if she's upset with it, that's completely fair. But at the same time, I'd argue that in general, she's doing a better job at diversifying her content from before. And if she feels like there's nothing to talk about in one topic, expanding to another might be the way to go. Will your audience change? Absolutely. But in doing so, if you truly have the stuff that you think is interesting to talk about, people will be there to support you. You don't need to keep talking about it.
Steven Universe, at least, has a lot of things to unpack. It's fascinating to do that. I could sit here and look at episodes that work and compare and contrast them to episodes that don't for hours upon hours upon hours if I wanted to. And I do want to, but I understand when a video has gotten too long.
Still think the show is pretty bad. But it's bad in fascinating ways that I could spend so much time going through. But I am going to take this segment to talk about things from the old video that I would gouge out with a rusty spoon if I could.
I feel like this is going a bit too far conceptually. What I mean is that a creative muse is something that inspires you for sure. But you're definitely planning on using it as a creative muse obsessively and parasocially. First off, this explanation by itself gives the impression that you want to take everything apart with this show. But when you use it so often, no matter how exciting it looks, it'll make you seem monotonous, stale, dependent, and limited in your own opinions.
For one, the tone. The video is very aggressive and personal, and some get the indication I think Sugar killed my family or something. Funnily enough, people blame this on like some kind of Machiavellian agenda. This actually wasn't unique to this video. Most of the videos I made in 2017 and 2018 were quite angry. This is just the only one most of you have seen.
I was being severely abused by my partner at the time, and it made me an unpleasant person to be around. No excuse for that. I wasn't in a good place mentally, and I'm in a better place mentally now, and I'm with someone else who makes me very happy.
In your last video, the one in which you were severely abused by your partner, you called Sugar a creep for how they portrayed Stevani, implied that she was too stupid to realize fascist sympathizing implications in her own story, said that they didn't have a set plan for the plot twist they set up because of reasons, and implied that she was also racist. In this video, you were in a good place mentally and showed it by implying that Rebecca Sugar put sexual assault in her own children's show, a rather creepy thing to do, believing that she tried to tiptoe around the stupidity that she had, adding in Nazi sympathizing implications by adding coercive world building, saying that she wrote redeem villains on a post-it note and then left it there to do stuff with for reasons, and implied that she's following a trend of black women being less represented and talked about than the white women in their shows, implying that the very nature of her writing is racist. I don't know if the reasoning really checks out here.
While I don't think Sugar is a talented creator, I would apologize for the sheer barrage of personal attacks if I could. I was taking out my anger at many other things onto this project that I'd been working on for a while, and like I said, every video was like this. I was just taking out my anger on everything else, and that was obscenely wrong of me. Not gonna sugarcoat it, obscenely wrong.
This is a very nice sentiment, but theoretically, you do have the platform to reach out to people and tell them that your views have changed through the video, Making a public apology is nice, but you could change the description of the video to point it out, or even change the title of your video to say outdated. Heck, you even changed your description to say that you don't follow the racism opinions that you shared, but you didn't do any of this for the rest of the video.
Actually, she did do those things. At least, sort of. On January 24th, Lily Orchard delisted her original video, claiming that it contributed to nothing but her harassment, especially since there's very little in that video she stands by, and it enabled a parasocial hatred of herself and the show. Huh. Well, anyways, that's all fair and good, but not even a day later, she relisted the video and deleted the post from before. On her Tumblr, she said it was a result of people being such illiterate randals about it all, and decided to not be graceful about it.
But that feels like a problem too. Like, obviously so, right? By her own admittance, she's endangering her family and enabling the parasocial hatred that she wanted to prevent.
Very much so, but we'll save the stuff for later, potentially.
Ugh, okay.
For 2, Stevonnie. I was way too harsh on Stevonnie. At the time, Steven Universe was the only place you could get NB rep in animation, and the fact that it sucked certainly didn't help. But since then, we've actually had non-binary rep get better and worse at the same time, so Steven Universe is just in this weird middle ground.
Compared to Double Trouble, Stevonnie is practically merciful. I think Steg probably really tempered my opinion on Stevonnie. It's kind of clear that the imagination for other fusion designs just wasn't really there for any of Steven's fusions with other humans. They both look like they came right out of Becky's spank bank, honestly.
Hey there, audience. I have a question. Which is better, passive aggression or aggression? I can't tell anymore, and the implication that these designs are just part of a spank bank is like, what the heck? Also, the implication that Rebecca Sugars just puts her fetishes in the show, that's another point from Easy Peasy.
And the fact that, as you know, they say that once is a happenstance, twice is a coincidence, but 3 times is an awful fetish, well, yeah, Jeff Lu probably has a macro fetish. I'm just saying, I'm just speculating, I'm gonna get sued.
Smoky Quartz and Rainbow Quartz were just a lot better, but my criticisms of them crossed the line into outright MB-phobia at times, and I apologize for that.
In general, non-binary characters are characters I've always found very interesting. The sheer breadth of experiences and presentations and identities can be very creative, and it always bothered me that for a long time, designers either went full non-human or stayed strictly femme. I said it poorly in the last video, but non-binary characters are an unexplored frontier of character design, and so few people really run with it.
I feel like actually presenting them as, and having them be out as non-binary, is, like a lot of things when they first start, a sign of them trying to take a step forward in talking about them, even if they are femme-leaning characters. While so many people rarely run with it, there is a reason why other than creative control, especially on something like network TV.
Despite common opinion, I never actually called Sugar a Nazi. What I did was question whether the show's fixation on redeeming space Nazis from the moon was malice or stupidity, and I've always concluded that it's stupidity. I concluded that in the video itself, but I think I did hang on that issue far too long.
Okay. While I have denied her saying that Lily has called Rebecca Sugar a Nazi, at this point there's some things I want to point out. Because it's after you deny that Rebecca Sugar was a Nazi sympathizer that I want to focus on. First, there's the fact that you wouldn't blame anyone who comes to that conclusion, which is incredibly irresponsible on your end. Because the fact that you wouldn't blame anyone for making this conclusion is inherently one that says it's okay to look at this show and this creator in a bad faith way. And the part immediately after, where you believe that all of this was built on stupidity, makes it even worse, with the fact that you're talking down to this creator due to your own conclusions of the show.
I actually rewrote that entire section 2 years ago, and I think it's just way better. It talks about how the show's commitment to redemption at any cost ends up being very unintentionally cruel to abuse survivors. Look, I'm an abuse survivor myself, and one thing I will never be on board with is some dickhead telling me I need to forgive for my own sake. I've been abused quite severely throughout my life, and by a lot of people, and I've made peace with some of them, and I haven't made peace with others, and one, I would dig my memories of them out of my head with a rusty screwdriver and forget they ever existed if I could.
And nowhere in that path of recovery did anyone insisting I needed to forgive ever do anything but piss me off.
Blah blah blah, forgiveness and redemption. The show's themes aren't about forgiveness and redemption. The times we're never redeemed. I've said all this stuff before. But then Lily goes somewhere way worse. Like, I get that she suffered abuse, and I understand that, but that doesn't give you the right to make bad faith criticisms of a show and misinterpret it to fit with your own narrative. It absolutely doesn't give you any excuse for reading the show as abuse apologia when that's not what changed your mind or the rest of the arc with the diamonds were about, and it doesn't give you the excuse to use your assault as a protection from criticism.
A lot of abuse survivors are gaslit into believing that being angry will make them a monster, and you will never convince me that this is a good thing to teach people, especially children. I will always be firmly against that very concept, especially in children's animation.
Funnily enough, the show doesn't teach that. In fact, it teaches very much the opposite of it, twice, in which an abuse survivor or otherwise trauma survivor believes that being angry would make them into a monster that expresses that to the outside world. But thanks to a support system of friends and loved ones, they were able to get out of that spiral, like with Steven. But hypothetically, what if you gaslit yourself into believing that about an abuse survivor, that being angry made them into a monster, and you taught that to your audience, like with Lapis Lazuli?
I would delete the entire animation segment. Even when that video went up, I wasn't entirely on board with it. I know behind the scenes a lot of pre-production work just wasn't done, and the animators were working overtime, also writing the story, and the only reason projects do that is because writers are unionized and animators aren't. So when your storyboarders are writing the episodes, you can pay them less.
All the excuses about visual storytelling? Complete horseshit. Shows with scripts and writers do visual storytelling all the time, and Steven Universe's claim to visual storytelling is pretty weak. And honestly, that deserved to have way more focus than the fact that the characters aren't on model, because that shit's a symptom, and a symptom nobody would care about if the writing was better.
Man, are we really doing this? It was fine until the complete horseshit part 2. After you went out of your way to miss the visual storytelling in the last one out of Beat City, and the one in Volleyball, and the one in Friendship, heck, what about the visual storytelling you praised in Bubbled or Rose's Scabbard? At this point, it would just be a mute point to say that Lily is cherry-picking which aspects of the visual storytelling you want to focus on, or which ones are more direct rather than subtler ones that aren't to your taste.
For sixes, this is less of a retraction and more of an expansion, but I really got on Becky's case for the puberty subject, just being carte blanche to perv on Stevani. The truth is, a lot of teenage girls do get hypersexualized once they hit puberty, but that's not really a puberty thing, so much as it is a men being pervs thing.
The thing that really bothered me was Becky's statement about how hitting puberty gives you the body of an adult and how it gives you power, and to put that kind of thing onto puberty and suggest that is kind of missing the forest for the trees. Being objectified doesn't give you power, it's the exact opposite of that.
From the statement that you brought up, Rebecca Sugar says that puberty gives you the body of an adult, and that it gives you power, not that it gives you the body of an adult, which gives you power through objectification. There's no connection there other than the one that you made up yourself. Like, I understand that your connection was in relation to Stevani having a body of someone going through puberty, and that she's hypersexualized, but that's not a good link between puberty overall and perceived hypersexualization.
Then again, the quote I was taking from is highly likely to have been misspoken. Becky misspeaks more than I do, and I've actually said the phrase, her pronouns are they, them, multiple times in the past. My speech is fucked. I'm not an eloquent lady, and so I'm inclined to just ignore that issue today. Like, on reflection, this is small potato stuff in comparison to, like, the big picture issue.
But it does raise my point about how Stevani is supposed to be non-binary, but the expression of the trials and tribulations of puberty are being done almost exclusively from a feminine perspective, when that's only half of their components.
I feel like this ignores a bit of the non-binary experience. Like, there's a fact that there are cases in which people don't actually know any non-binary feelings towards their body until they go through puberty and stuff, whether it's not knowing how to put the feeling into words, or believing that your experience is the same as others that are your gender. It takes a while, and a bit of spending time truly being in your body before you get accustomed to who you are, and what you'd like to change about yourself in terms of the non-binary experience. Heck, like you say, we see this in how they become more acquainted with being non-binary the more time they spend together in more episodes.
The conclusion drawn there is that if you want to do a puberty episode, then just do a puberty episode. Don't do a fusion episode. Granted, this is something that improved leaps and bounds as the show went on, especially in the one episode where Stevani has facial hair, which is a design element most people just wouldn't do. On reflection, with the show being done, it's clear the writers give a shit about non-binary rep. They might have sucked at it for a while, but sucking at something isn't a problem. Sucking at something can be fixed with patience. And I still maintain that Shep is fucking amazing. If we had to stumble through a minefield to get Shep, then fucking cheers.
I'll drink to that, it's more visible effort than She-Ra had. Here's a dirty secret that I've known for years. People will get on board with any idea if you tell a good story and tell it well. If it takes you a while, people are fine with that. You don't have to preemptively try and counter internet grumbling. Let them grumble.
So, like, is this preemptive internet grumbling, or is this well-justified criticism of Steven Universe's non-binary rep, but only in the early stages? Wait a second. I just realized, why do you complain about the earlier episodes where it wasn't confirmed that they were non-binary, and specifically complain that they didn't know they were non-binary immediately?
See, this is what I'm talking about. The leaps and bounds between when Steven Universe is fucking brilliant and when it smashes its face against a mountain is so interesting to break down. That's what happens when you wear your inspirations on your sleeve. That's what happens when something can be practically unpacked forever if you wanted to. I have wanted to do other videos on Steven Universe, and I've always restrained myself because there's this narrative that all I do is talk about it for hours, but like, I do want to talk about it for hours.
I want to go over it with a fine-tooth comb like a fucking archaeologist.
Well, I'm glad you blatantly admitted to the show living rent-free in your head. Also, this ignores that seemingly every video that you've done mentions or references Steven Universe in some way, shape, or form over the past 5 years up to this point.
So fuck it, might as well put it out there. I do a podcast occasionally with my wife and whoever wants to talk about a given subject, usually just one of my friends. Someone who loves this show and thinks it's brilliant writing and has interesting arguments as to why, and who is 19 years of age or older, I'm offering to let you come on and do a podcast with me. Let me be clear, this is not a debate, and it is not an argument. It's not so you can complain about fake Nazi accusations. I'm inviting you to come nerd the fuck out. Come info dump to me.
I've never heard a coherent argument for why this show is good, and I want to hear it.
Now, This is the end of the video, but that last statement, we need to talk about it. There's multiple reasons why you shouldn't go through her podcast to talk about Steven Universe. While it does seem like an earnest and honest attempt to understand another perspective, if you remember at the very beginning, she doesn't want anything to challenge her in terms of perspective when it comes to positively viewing Steven Universe. So it's incredibly doubtful for her to change in a major way, especially since she's attached like a parasite to Steven Universe. Then there's the fact that she talked at length about how half of the themes of the show are taken from Utena or other anime, so she could just criticize anime to get her point across. Finally, Lily does not actively engage with Steven Universe on its level or a true level of understanding another perspective. You would not only be doing her work for her, but at this point, it doesn't really matter. Lily has burnt through the trust of pretty much every Steven Universe fan as a result of the 5-year-old video, and her videos over those 5 years, including the famous Ideologically Rotten video. While she wasn't the only one besides ER and Easy Peasy who had criticisms towards the show, and weren't right-wing jokesters, out of all of them, this was the biggest one. This was the oil spill on the fire that ignited so many people to just not try and talk about Steven Universe in any sort of positive light. It wasn't always like that though, and eventually people were able to see the show in that positive light thanks to so many people like Red Van Buskirk and Cartoonshi reconsidering their positions and talking about how, while it has flaws, it's still pretty good. And it's to the point where Lily Orchard, the woman who initially wielded so much power against the show, whether it's intentional or not, being able to pull so many people in and continuing to do so for a long time, ended up being drowned out by the people who saw what Steven Universe did in earnestness, admiration, and appreciation, and knew that Lily, for the most part, didn't. The lesson here isn't that her conclusion was that she wasn't wrong about Steven Universe. The lesson is that nobody truly cares. And that's the biggest reason why you shouldn't info dump to her.
Well, we're at the end of the video. Might as well show this.
I know you don't like Madoka Magica, the deconstructed magical girl anime, but I was wondering if you'd be interested in hearing from someone who actually likes the anime and discuss why and the message of the anime and the creator's words, etc. Like the way you mentioned wanting to hear from someone who likes Steven Universe and geek out with you. I'm not a 100% expert on the subject of the anime, but I don't want to waste your time on it if you don't want to hear it. Would you be interested in that discussion?
There's an Oralities video I could watch if I wanted to. Let me make this clear. I already know what the story is about and the intended themes. The problem is to get through it, you have to watch a child be violently deconstructed multiple times, and I don't want to. Same thing with Utena. I get it. I know the themes, I know them better than most of you, but I don't want to watch 30 episodes of a black teenager being put through the absolute ringer no matter how good the show supposedly is. You guys have to stop interpreting doesn't like it with didn't get it.
Interesting, Lily. Why would you want that when you could just look up videos by yourself? Or that you believe that you already know all the themes better than we do?
Another thing to add, I think this actually makes a statement against Lily actually watching Revolutionary Girl Utena, which hypothetically means that everything she said about the show was a lie or heard from secondhand sources. But she could have misspoken. Either way, I feel like that's something.
Something a little funny to lead to the final thoughts for me. So, where do we begin? Well, this video definitely covered less than the 2-hour video, and that comes with a blessing and a curse. Because of course, less of a bad thing is good, but its lack of coverage would leave a lot of people confused on your opinion of other parts of the video. Opinions that you seemingly drop out of nowhere, like how Lapis is an abuser, how Mindful Education is a shit episode, how pearls are actually just slaves, and how the pink diamond reveal wasn't actually planned at all. All the points that were brought in and not elaborated since the first video. And despite you saying that there's little in the original video that you agree with, it actually seems like the opposite for a lot of cases. While I admit that Lily has gotten better at articulating herself, a lot of her points are wrong because the fundamental connections that she makes are wickedly wrong. Like, if Utena was a primary inspiration for the themes and storytelling of Steven Universe, if Bismuth was teaching that there's no reason for any violence against any of your oppressors, if the show was truly about redemption and forgiveness, if Steven was the moral center, if filler was made in such a way that would apply to Steven Universe, and if the diamonds were redeemed, then you might have some fair points, but none of those are correct, so they fall flat and hit you like a punch in the gut. For every lack of aggression, for every NB-phobic remark, and for every moment of plagiarism that Lily confronts and talks about, there are a few more steps back, with passive-aggressive remarks towards the creator, some baseless assumptions about how the production cycle could have gone, a repeated mention of sexual assault between Pearl and Garnet, and a bunch of other regular SU hate bandwagon talking points that went further than both ER and Easy Peasy, and a bunch of tangents that make this genuinely feel like a glass of water video, or I guess a coffee break video. And that leads to my final point. Lily ends her video saying that she really wants to talk more about Steven Universe, offering to let people come in on her live stream to talk some stuff out with her. And here's the thing, she shouldn't. There's a few people who would talk to you on a stream. The first one is the people who've seen both the original 2-hour video and this updated one. Maybe they've seen those updates you've posted too. But for those people, all they would try to do is dunk on you. There's not gonna be a dialogue. There's just gonna be people there to either make easy targets or to easily target with a ban. But in all seriousness, the real audience that'll tune into the live stream are fans or bystanders that have stuck around for 5 years listening to you talk about this stuff. Even if we discount your 2-hour video, you spent a lot of time bringing up Steven Universe in a negative light, to the point where everyone is either already wary of who you are, as a stringent hater of Steven Universe, or a role model who just isn't wrong as the voice of SU Critical and therefore won't question you. It's resulted in 2 echo chambers when it comes to this, either those who still like Lily and those who don't. We've gotten to the point where the echo chamber that doesn't watch Lily overshadows the one that does in terms of neutral opinion, whether it's thanks to videos like this or other stuff. But I'll leave it to my therapist after one final note. To anyone who's actually made it this far and is still a fan of Lily, for those who are, I understand that Lily is a source of inspiration for most people. Truly, I get that. And even if you don't like everything she's done, you're here for the stuff you do like, rather than the stuff you don't. And I won't deny that she's definitely earned an air of professionalism, and can, once in a blue moon, make some good points. But the way that she utilizes criticism is one that comes from rarely taking in any other perspective, and relying more on her own. And while bias is something that is unavoidable for a critic, her bias leads her to make general sweeping statements on topics she's not knowledgeable enough to fully understand, build in echo chambers to the point where dissenting opinions do not matter, and use that same confirmation bias to build up her positions more in the first place. Do not idolize her opinions, and experience the media she talks about for yourself before believing in what Lily says, because a lot of it is built upon lies. But there's more to that than this. Take it away, therapist. Thanks, I appreciate it. Now I'm gonna cut out the voice, because in reality, yeah, it's been me the whole time. And I would keep it going, but I'll stop with the goofy voices for now, because this is serious stuff. For those who only know Lily for her videos, we need to talk about everything else behind the scenes, and it's for a very important point. Before we begin with this though, for the following section, this is unfortunately a lot to handle for some people, so I've held up a content warning up to a certain point, so you can skip to there if you don't want to hear anything in regards to that. And for many Lily fans, Lily enjoyers, or even Lily tolerators that get to this point, please pay attention to my message at the very end. If you feel like you can't handle hearing about these things, or if you've heard them all before, then you could also skip this point. I need to apologize in advance, because I had to re-record this part, as so much has happened since I originally finished scripting. In any case, here we go. Okay, so remember how Lily talks about how she wrote the original video while in an abusive relationship with someone?
So when I see people still passing it around trying to refute it, I feel like I'm locked in a time loop where a video I made while I was dealing with severe abuse and was therefore constantly angry is being held up as if it reflects everything about me today.
Well, she's referring to Lizzie Orchard, her ex-fiancé. After the relationship ended, Lizzie revealed how Lily went out of her way to break boundaries with her by making her draw NSFW art, coercing her to do so via emotional manipulation, and even on stream where Lizzie burst into tears. While Lily stopped asking around a few months after, the experience of making hand-drawn sex tapes, as she put it, was emotionally and sexually abusive to her in doing so, forcing her to do stuff that she didn't want to do for Lily's own gratification. Lily's response? A smear campaign making herself seem like the victim. Now, with this point alone, there's 2 things to keep in mind. First off, there's always been a claim where Lily uses Darvo to get her way. Darvo is an abusive technique defined by denying anything that took place, attacking the abused for standing up for themselves, and then reversing the roles of victim and the oppressor. We can see this here, in which Lily denied that she was the abusive one, attacked her, and then reversed the roles. The second thing we'll keep in mind is, if she's telling the truth. It is possible that this could indeed just be her telling the truth, but in this case, she isn't, as a result of Lizzie's testimonies detailing about how Lizzie broke down crying on stream as a result of Lily's actions. After 2 years of Lily's smear campaign, Lizzie also brought out another form of cheating that Lily did, getting her sexual gratification from randoms off of Twitter. And when Lizzie expressed how disgusted it made her after roleplay sexting with some randoms, Lily stopped, saying it would ruin her YouTube career if it ever got out. What did Lily do as a response? Continue to deny that it ever happened, lying about the event, and making herself the victim. This isn't the first time that she's done these abusive techniques though, as she's done it with several people beforehand, though not necessarily to the fiancé level. The most well-known of these is Josh Scorcher, who was emotionally abused by Lily to the point where he doubted their friendship, after which Lily denied it, made Josh into a punching bag for her channel, calling him a malignant human cancer for his views, and claimed that Josh was an abuser, sending a harassment mob against her.
I do not cave to grabbing all your mates and dogpiling me. Josh tried that crap. Twice, and that's someone with a massive and rabid fan base who will go so far as to dox me and threaten to kill me and my family.
We can also deny this being true, not only from his response to Lily video, in which he brought up instances of Lily making angry posts about him, and the video she states it, in which Josh makes it explicitly clear to not send any death threats to her. Then there's also Anime Chrissy, who wanted her art in a Lily Orchard video credited. Lily ended up deceiving her, tricking her into filing a DMCA against her content, and knowing that it wouldn't help, as she wouldn't actually credit the art.
I then told Christy that if a few seconds was that important to her, then she should file a DMCA and have the video taken down, which she did. What I neglected to mention was that a DMCA ain't gonna do shit if you don't have full intention of suing me. Of course, I submitted a counter notification, which would require her to elevate her claim to actual legal action, and she relinquished the claim and made a final attempt to save face, because when you fail at being right, the best recourse is to make idiots think you're the bigger person.
In this way, she tries downplaying the manipulation that she put Anime Chrissy through, and when Anime Chrissy responded with a hashtag campaign asking her to respect the artist, Lily claimed that it was just the meltdown of an art diva, and claimed that she should be allowed to use the art without credit, again, making her into the victim and Anime Chrissy into the oppressor. There's no denying that this is true, as it all gets explored in the video she made, and Aaron Tempest already made a stellar response to it. Speaking of DMCAs, Lily recently filed several of them against some content creators making videos against her, Sai and Anthony Gramaglia. In doing so, she minimized the DMCAs by saying that they were only 10-day timeouts.
She'll do another response video to my video on Nom Nom Nami, and I'll send her for another 10-day streaming timeout.
And then attacked them, and made herself out as the victim, claiming that they were stealing content from her, when in fact, they were using the content transformatively, which you can see in Sai's streams or Anthony's analyses of her videos, both of which are up for anyone to see. Remember when I talked about Scars, the fanfic that Lily was working on that she brought up to talk about how she's inspired by Kingdom Hearts, and to dunk on Steven Universe seemingly taking so much from Utena, the one where she prepares a professionally TV-grade work done by a team to her own fanfiction?
So I'm a writer myself, both personally as I work on my own hobbies, and professionally through this channel and ghostwriting on the side. I've been writing stories since I was 14, and the main piece of original fiction I've been working on the last few years is called Scars, a story set in the 90s about two people who have been as close as they can possibly be since they were kids, contrasting their very different lived experiences.
Well, not only is that fanfiction dead, but that fanfiction is one in which two step-siblings end up falling in love with each other. Yeah. Essentially, one was adopted into another's family, and then they, get romantic? Well, you may also remember that she's been writing these stories since she was 13, and the further back you go, you get to Stockholm. For those unaware, Stockholm is an MLP fanfiction in which Rainbow Dash, an adult in the world, tries to Scootaloo, a child in the world, and then gets arrested for it. It is both blatantly and when it got brought up, she's denied that she had any involvement in it, admits that she does, but she didn't write any of the bad stuff, or admit that she wrote it, but people don't actually get what the story was about, to which I Love Kim Possible a lot directly asked her about, to which she lied about straight to her face, leading to the end of their friendship.
The other thing that I guess is kind of coming out of the woodwork is this fan fiction that I didn't know about, like, not to bring it up, but like...
So, I was really fucking pissed off at the fact that fanfiction just basically just kind of let anything go in regards to content and just hosted a shitload of child porn. So I wrote a book where basically a fic where a bunch of pedophiles just get shot in the head. And then Bronies got really mad about it and started lying about its contents.
Right. Well, from my understanding, the context or Scootaloo and some of the other CMC have like relations with the with Rainbow Dash and stuff.
Nope. It's one of the more persistent pieces of fiction that pass around about me, because nothing passes the rounds better than passes the rounds more than trans girl predator.
Okay, well let me put it this way. I don't feel comfortable with any of this, Lily. I don't feel comfortable with these allegations against you. I just don't. So
Alright, goodbye.
Okay, bye.
And sure, you could say that it's something cringy that she did in her past and moved on from, but those themes stayed in some ways. In this post here, Lily blatantly talks about the fact that she wrote a story in which two siblings are married to one another. And of course, we have Scars, which has similar themes like that. They didn't stay as themes, unfortunately. During that time, there was a user named Britt, who was emotionally abused by Lily and sexually harassed by a sock puppet of hers named Tara Callie, an alias that tried to force her, a lesbian, into being sexual with Lily before she transitioned. The existence of Tara Callie is also a strange one, in which it was proven that they were the same account using the same IP address and device, and never had any record of showing her face, her voice, or anything about her that wasn't a screen grab from the internet. The denial of Tara Callie is weird. While she existed in so many places and Lily even knows that apparently she exists, no evidence of her existing has been found yet, even when she was apparently in an relationship with her sibling. Then she was announced dead in a car crash, before telling the world that the doctor was wrong about it, and then getting busted for having CP on her computer, one that apparently was not Lily's computer, and an instance in which Lily was apparently able to beat her up in prison. While we'll get to the Darvo of Tara's existence later, I will point out that if Tara was actually really there, Lily has not been able to provide any photos of what they look like, and given everything we know about Lily, she apparently held a long-term relationship with this woman. Then we go all the way back around to Josh Scorcher, and a ship that Lily had for him at the time called Fire Rose, a ship of Josh Scorcher and another MLP reviewer at that time, Ink Rose. While they interacted once as a result of a push from people like Lily, they didn't want to go anywhere with it, especially since Ink Rose was a minor during that time. Well, it didn't stop Lily from taking her status at the time as a conservative and trying to harass her for it, claiming that she hates gay people and harassing her audience to compile as much ship art as they can for her.
Or you might, the fanbase has rocks for brains after all.
Of course, when this was brought up after a decade or so, Lily claims that Ink Rose and Josh Scorcher were actually in a pedophilic relationship, and that Lily was forced to stay quiet about it. With the information we have, we know that these are all lies, as if anyone was pushing a relationship between them, it was Lily. But if she was telling the truth, and she was forced to stay quiet about it, it would be far, far worse. Keeping information on a in her community for 10 years while not saying anything about it, enabling it by shipping them, and yet harassing the victim of the relationship. But of course, this leads to Patchwork Heart. For those who don't know, in the MLP community, there was a by the name of Toon Critic who had a relationship with Patchwork Heart, a minor at the time. While Josh Scorcher tried to get a police report filed for him, he did not consider Patchwork's vulnerability at the time, to which Lily actually helped them. However, after that, things went south. Not only did Lily use her position to try and get Josh to remove all the videos on her,
but personally, a much more impactful gesture in that sense would be to just take down all 4 of them.
Definitely something to consider.
All four of what?
All 4 response videos. The 2 to me, the 1 to Master of Foxes, the 1 to Flames on Fire. All of them.
But Lily did not keep Patchwork safe for very long. Lily coerced Patchwork into drawing NSFW artwork of her and Lizzie Sonas that they weren't comfortable with, making herself out to be the sympathetic victim in all of this, as Patchwork was trying their hardest to make her happy. When Patchwork opened up about this artwork in a server called The Barrel, it got leaked, and as soon as it did, Lily tried as hard as she could to yet again smear Patchwork and make herself seem like the victim in all of this, calling them a drug-addicted lunatic, a drama whore, a cow, a whack job, and delusional. After Patchwork and Lily broke off their friendship, they came clean to Lizzie about it, how they feel guilty about it, how it felt like Lily was getting her sexual gratification from someone else specifically, like they were helping Lily cheat on Lizzie. But worse than all of that was the account of Courtney, Lily's sister. Remember when Lily was talking to her therapist in the middle of talking about Pink Diamond?
She's just like me. Okay, I said that as a joke, but like, during the writing of this video, I actually did make another appointment with my therapist and unpack the fact that the only positive relationship I had as a child was a lie and was actually quite abusive, and that's partly why I'm so bad at having relationships with people.
As well as talking to her about the one family member that she never wanted to reach out to.
At time of making the old video, I was estranged from all of my immediate relatives, and at the time of making this one, I'm tentatively on sociable terms with 3 of them, and the 4th I would like to forget ever existed, but I did that at my own pace.
That's what this is about. After a very long time of not being seen online, Courtney tried to reach out to Lily and talk to her, and when Lily didn't want anything to do with her, she ended up making her own callouts against Lily. And here, it was revealed that Stockholm was based on her, her friends, and Lily. And even worse than that is the fact that, according to Courtney, Lily was coercing and molesting her sister for a decade from childhood, and her thoughts of, what if my sister consented to this, are what she actually used Stockholm for. And yet again, Lily is lying, turning the tables like she did with Lizzie, and making herself the victim. And let me be crystal clear here. The only evidence to truly support this is he said, she said. These are all allegations, and all that any of us could do in this scenario is either take Lily's word or Courtney's word. There's not any hard evidence to go over, so I'm not making any definitive claims. I just wanted to point out that Lily's doing the same thing that she did to Lizzie, to Josh, to Patchwork, to Britt, to so many others that it's hard to tell which ones are true, if there are any false, or if the sky just continues to fall when she's around. Which becomes a bit stranger when we think about the definition of reactive abuse that she put up, and how she reacted to Courtney coming out about the information. From a speculative standpoint, it would seem as if she's framing Courtney's reactions to Lily as a proof of her being the abuser. However, with the fact that this is all, again, speculation, I won't go any further with this. For a while, I was holding on to this information, not knowing what to do with everything. I could do a separate video on the topic, but there are too many people who have done that, and so much compilation of all the terrible stuff she's done so far, and there will be people who continue to do so. Because all this behavior is disgusting and deserves to be documented and reported. But there's a few reasons where I brought this up at the very end of this video. The first one is that obviously, this is my last reason as to why this is my last video on Lily Orchard. She only deserves the benefit of the doubt. The, even though she's despicable, she does make good points question for so long before there's a breaking point somewhere. It was after finding out a lot of this information and putting it together that I remembered a quote from Lily's original video.
It's a writing lesson I learned the very hard way. If you set out to give one idea in your work and through ineptitude accidentally give the opposite impression, you should accept the responsibility for that and refuse to stand by that work and fix it by either rewriting it or disassociating yourself from it.
And at first glance, this is what she did with her Steven Universe video, or at least what she tried. But there's one key phrase that rubbed me the wrong way here: disassociating yourself from it. And that's the kicker. It made me realize the connection between her wretched actions and her content. She tries to pretend that the bad actions of her past don't exist, and try to move away from it as the victim. But in return, she doesn't realize how much influence her actions have, nor the severity. You can't put out a fire by ignoring it, and because it's what Lily does, her whole world is a maze of fire that has hurt so many people. And believing that because she didn't get burned, she can continue as is, telling her audience to ignore the flames and by proxy ignore the truth. A lot of points she makes are, of course, informed by her own perspective, but even that perspective that she presents to people is formed from lies and deception to her audience, claiming that she took out the flames while they remained brighter than before. This constant victimization of herself sets up a narrative in which she can do no wrong, and she ends up surrounding herself in an audience that believes that, at least to the people who idolize her and her points. And in doing so, she can use that as a shield for criticism that people lob at her for her uninformed, vile, and sometimes dangerous takes that poison the well for everyone in online spaces, as well as shielding herself from the consequences of her actions.
Steven Universe is rated on IMDb at 8.2 out of 10. On Google, it's rated a 4.7 stars out of 5, and its ratings per episode were higher than any other cartoon released that decade, with the exception of Teen Titans Go. I never tarnished its reputation.
Spreading harassment campaigns against others while remaining bulletproof. Heck, if you want to talk about it even more, there's her recent video, in which she talked about how much harassment she's faced in her life. What it actually was, is cherry-picking evidence to make everyone seem worse, and to make herself out to be the victim. Again, she goes out of her way to post screenshots out of order, and refuses to mention context like Tara Callie, the sock puppet account that was abusive towards Britt.
This is what Brittany uses to accuse me.
When someone else makes an accusation with no proof, Brittany will go, I can confirm this, here's her sock puppet account. This is my first time seeing her proof, and it's fucking nothing. I don't even know what program this uses. It's literally nothing. And this is what's being used as proof that I'm some super predator? Are you fucking kidding me? This is the most amateur hour shit show of a fucking interview I've ever seen.
Because here's the thing. While this statement might be one to put Britt's truthfulness on trial, it actually is the inverse and puts Lily's on trial. There are two possibilities. Either Tara Kelly does not exist, meaning that it was indeed a sock puppet of Lily's, and therefore Britt's statements, while they have the possibility of being fake, have some credence towards them, especially with your acknowledgement in other places that she was real, therefore putting you back on a truthfulness trial. The same goes for her possibilities of being the sock puppet of someone else. Or Tara Cowley does exist, and you know who she is, being the only one who knows who she is, dating her at some point, and not recognizing that Britt was coerced into being sexual with her, and not being sympathetic to a victim of emotional and sexual abuse by someone who had CP and groomed minors by your own admission, and the accusation of them being fake is one that is straight up victim blaming. Not to mention Lily's own emotionally abusive statements towards Britt, instead boiling it down to her obsession. Then there's why Patrick was uncomfortable with Lily.
I'm not even getting into Patch because it's the same thing. I commissioned art of my puppet from them, and then after the friendship ended, they decided they felt shortchanged and spun that into a story about me supposedly exploiting their financial situation. And that's literally it. That's their whole fucking story.
That being the use of Lily's finances to manipulate Patchwork, and then dropping her and making up slanderous lies about her. What Stockholm was basically everything to do with Lizzie.
The thing is, these two, as well as my ex being allergic to communicating anything, messed me up.
And quite literally reversing the roles of victim and oppressor with Courtney.
When we were teenagers, Courtney walked into my room one afternoon and made a simple ultimatum. Don't resist or I'll tell Dad you raped me. And then she raped me that day, and continued to do so for a year. I mentioned being sexually abused at 2 points in my life by 2 different people. Here are their names.
You know, the actual egregious parts of why people believe that she's dangerous. And at the very end, she reads some comments about people saying, yeah, I stopped watching her video after her Steven Universe video, and then screams as to why she thinks this campaign has been going on for so long.
I'm not joking. I've said all this is just because of my media takes in the past, because they can't stop making that clear. Steven Universe is garbage, and here's why is brought up in the comments of every single one of these videos. People are still so utterly seething over me not liking a show to the point they will believe anything about me without looking into it. These people make up entire mythologies about me ruining the reputation of someone whose career is doing fucking fine.
She dismisses the allegations levied against her, stuff that is almost completely unrelated to Steven Universe, because some people also just happen to not like her Steven Universe takes. Let's be real though, even if hypothetically there are people like the comments you read that decide to add less important and sometimes irrelevant stuff to the Lily Sucks Tower, the one thing to remember is that bad coverage of the bad things that a bad person does doesn't negate the bad thing that a bad person does. Oh, and speaking of, after this video released, Lily changed her banner to 1700 criminal allegations, 0 convictions, which A, is totally what an innocent person would say, and B, is unbelievably insane. Not only the fact that she repeatedly victimizes herself while trying to keep the image of being stronger than her harassers, but do you know who else had allegations but no convictions? Toon Critic. The person who grew Patchwork Heart, the one who Lily initially saved Patchwork from. She didn't keep it that way though. She changed it to suffering a terminal illness of being correct. This is why it's impossible to keep her content separate from her as a person, because Lily uses her content to influence her audience of who she is as a person, a perpetual victim who rises above the people she believes to be the victim of, and who she is as a person tries to express her dangerous, wrong, and inflammatory views through her content. And she's been doing that for a long time, and that includes this video. If you have an online space and use it to make content, you have the responsibility to use it responsibly, and Lily has been irresponsible with her presence for a long time. And benefit of the 4 years of doubt, even if she does get better, she can't undo the damage she did, or even begin to make things right, unless she decides to stop victimizing herself. And when she does do that, she has to answer for a lot of bullshit. If any Lily fan, enjoyer, or tolerator is gonna be as naive as I was, and believe her lies about her getting better, then I hate to say it, but it might be a lost cause to even consider trying. I highly advise people away from that option, as they'll continue to get burned by the fire, like I was and so many others were. And with all that said and done, I'm doing all of this to show that I'm not just defining her by her past, that I'm bringing up some unnecessary information to try and dunk on her. I'm saying that Lily, at least as of now, intertwines emotional manipulation about herself into this video and so many others, and has been doing so for a long time. Lily Orchard gets rid of, or obfuscates, parts of her past while using it as a shield from criticism. She uses her present self to separate herself from the past, emotionally manipulating her audience while using her content to complain about stuff that she deals with personally, and her future self is one fueled on spite. One that believes that using her deleted past and her petty present can help her move into this ignorant future, where she realistically only has two options. Either ignore doing anything with Steven Universe while continuing to obfuscate what she talks about, or continue talking about it out of her present day spite. And whether or not you decide to factor that into the work, she was, is, and will be wrong about Steven Universe.